Chapter 2249. After the Taoists' qi activity continued to rise, it finally stopped at a certain height. At that moment, everyone realized that their senses seemed to have been contaminated, but after the Weili was removed, it became much clearer. However, they all knew that the Weili did not disappear, but instead gathered on the incarnation of the creation spirit Weili. When Hongdu saw that the gathering of the Weili was over, the light in his eyes became sharp. He did not make any unnecessary movements, but immediately held a spell and chanted Tao sounds. In an instant, wherever his Weili went, the sound of Shen music was vibrated and endless Tao techniques were evolved. As soon as the voice rang out, the Taoist's figure instantly became blurry. He had already fallen into the all-existence, but now he seemed to be separated from it. Moreover, the mighty power that he had devoured was also severed. Taoist Feng Du's Tao technique was very mysterious. As long as he finished reciting this long chant and did not stop, he would be able to drive his opponent into eternal silence. Even if the opponent was a spirit of creation, it would not be an exception. Although the creation spirit's original body would not die because of this, when the original body truly descended, it would be impossible to get back the power that was lost. The Taoist realized his situation, and the brilliant treasure light behind him propped up. His body became much more stable, and the originally clear Tao sound also became much more chaotic and blurry. Then he reached out and grabbed at Hongdu. A sneer appeared on Feng Du's face as he continued to chant. His body took a step back, but there was still another version of himself standing there. When the treasure light arrived, it immediately passed through the figure in front of him, and the two of them disappeared together. Xiangju and the others did not have perfect bodies. In their memories, they only knew that Hongdu was better than them, but they were not very clear about what methods he had. However, at that moment when they saw the scene, it was not difficult to see that he could not stop before the Tao sound finished chanting, so they all made a move and pressed their Weili. However, when they collided with the Taoist's Weili, they were swallowed up. Hongwu said, "This person can devour our magic power." Xiangju narrowed his eyes and said, "Don't worry, he can devour our Weili. As long as he doesn't take away my Tao technique, he can't dissolve our Weili. With fellow Fengdu supporting us, let's see how much he can devour." Wei Ming nodded. Although the creation spirit's Weili was powerful, it could not suppress everyone. The act of devouring the Weili looked terrifying, but it was nothing more than that. As long as they were alive, they could give as much as he needed. Besides, they were not here to defeat him. They only wanted to hold him back from the side. When Fengdu's chanting ended, everything would be settled. The Taoist seemed to feel threatened and suddenly turned his face. Although his face did not reveal any facial features, only a layer of flowing light, Xiangju and the others could feel that this person was staring at them. Then the Taoist, Feng and Taoist. Hongwu and Ji Zhuang sensed that something was wrong, so they immediately stood up and supported their creation spirit, Pauline. Then, their expressions changed slightly. They felt that the Pauline in their hands was slightly heavier. It was clearly because they were supporting the Weili, but where did the Weili come from? They did not notice any signs beforehand. Wei Ming and Xiangju, who did not have the Pauline in their hands, frowned. They found that their bodies were actually turning into nothingness. Although the process looked extremely slow, the power that corroded their bodies appeared out of nowhere, and they were unable to guard against it. Xiangju was calm at this moment. He said, "Fellow Taoists, there is no need to be anxious. Let him do what he wants. The more he invests the Weili on us, the smoother it will be for fellow Fengdu. Moreover, if there is really danger, how can fellow Fengdu ignore it?" In a cave somewhere in the Kunshe continent, after Feng Mo sorted out his thoughts, he was ready to take the initiative to attack. He felt that although Zhang Chan and Meng Hu acted separately, Meng Hu was a person who abided by the rules. Therefore, even if he had a strange move arranged by his master in advance, he would definitely be lacking in decision-making and various adaptations. This was his chance. The other party would never have thought that a person who was being chased by them would suddenly turn around and attack. Through those vague futures, he determined a few possible locations for Meng Hu and secretly set up a formation. As soon as Meng Hu appeared, he would immediately rush over and kill him. He did not wait for long before the chi activity he had set up responded. However, this time, there were movements in two territories at the same time. He originally thought that he had accidentally discovered the tracks of Zhang Chan and Meng Hu. If that was the case, he could only give up on his plan. Forget about Meng Hu, Zhang Chan was very good at searching for traces. Once he came into contact with Meng Hu's chi activity, he would know the location of his opponent, but Meng Hu could also use this clue to find him. Putting aside the fact that he was not Meng Hu's opponent, to ensure that the general situation would not change in the future, he had to avoid meeting Meng Hu as much as possible. However, when he looked down, he realized that the situation was different from what he had imagined. The chi activity that had been triggered actually came from two Meng Hu. He did not have to think to know that one of these two was definitely a clone. However, after he observed for a while, he was shocked to find that no matter how he tried to distinguish, he could not tell which was the clone and which was the real one. Originally, waiting for Meng Hu to come to him so quickly was in line with his expectations, but this scene made him hesitate. Should he directly choose to attack one of them, or ignore it and continue to wait for a better opportunity to attack? If he chose to attack, once he made a wrong judgment, he would expose his goal. He might not be able to find such an opportunity again. He pondered for a while and felt that if Meng Hu continued to use the clone as a cover, could it be that he would not attack? Therefore, he decided to take the risk. With a thought, he teleported to the location where the chi activity was hidden. After a moment's examination, he headed in the direction of Meng Hu's location. However, at this moment, he didn't notice that as he gradually approached Meng Hu, the scenes of the future he saw were gradually disappearing, and a strand of vital energy was ceaselessly being drawn out from his body at a place he couldn't notice. The mountain and sea realm's western wilderness, Heaven-Shocking Mountain, was the headquarters of the Shaoqing sect. Hongyu was a guest there. When he had first arrived, he had said that he had come to discuss the sword. He had never imagined that he would be treated with extraordinary courtesy. This surprised him a bit. In his early years as a cultivator of the Primal Yang sect, he had had dealings with Shaoqing cultivators. However, he had never been treated with such courtesy. Later, he learned that after the mountain and sea realms Dao discussions, it was usually the Shaoqing disciples who went to visit other sections. Very few cultivators from the 9 continents would visit just to ask for advice. At this moment, he was discussing the Dharma with Ran Xiushu. Discussing the Dharma with a Shaoqing disciple was actually a discussion of the sword. However, when mortal cultivators fought to the death, there was no need for them to personally go into battle. All they had to do was to use their divine wills to simulate the battle. That way, not only would their relationship not be harmed, but they would also be able to compare who was superior. As the two of them were practicing their respective techniques, Hongyu was distracted for a moment, and his sword slowed down slightly. Just now, he sensed a familiar power appear. Ran Xiushu couldn't help but find it strange that he was distracted. Considering Hongyu's cultivation base, unless something unexpected happened, something like this would never happen. She asked, "What's wrong, fellow Taoist?" Hongyu shook his head. "It's nothing." Ran Xiushu saw that he didn't want to talk about it, so she didn't pursue the matter. Instead, she said in a slightly regretful tone, "Fellow Taoist sword technique is very brilliant. However, in my opinion, there are some areas where it is a bit conservative. If it were fully unleashed, its power would be even greater." He admired Hongyu very much. This person was able to break free from the old and bring forth the new. He fused the yin and yang swords and pushed his sword technique to an unprecedented height. It was extremely rare and precious. However, this flaw made him feel slightly regretful because the Hongyu he was facing right now was not at his peak. Hongyu fell silent for a while before saying, "That's because I encountered an opponent who defeated me without even using a single move. He only demonstrated his divine will. I've been thinking about how to deal with this setback. As a result, I lost the harmony in my sword technique." Ran Xiushu's interest was piqued when she heard that. She said, "There's actually such a person? May I know who he is? And what method did he use?" Hongyu did not mention Xinchang's name. He only roughly described the method that he used to achieve harmony. Ran Xiushu's eyes lit up when she heard that. She rubbed her hands and said, "May I know where he is now?" Hong Yu shook his head. "I don't know either. However, I think that with his cultivation base, there's probably only a few people in the same generation as him apart from the people in your sect. That's not necessarily the case." Ran Xiushu pointed upwards and said, "Do you know of that person in Xianyuan heaven?" Hong Yu's expression turned serious. "I've heard of him. His battle prowess in the past is also admirable. However, he has already reached the upper realm of cultivation. I can't even see his elegant demeanor even if I wanted to." Ran Xiushu said with a provocative smile, "You're mistaken, fellow Taoist. There's still a chance." Hong Yu glanced at him and asked, "What do you mean?" Ran Xiushu said, "The Origin Mirage Gate has a sect treasure called the Heart Image Spirit Return Great Spiritual Tablet. I believe fellow Taoist knows about it?" Hong Yu pondered for a while and nodded. "Are you saying that I can borrow this treasure to see that person's past? However, that person has already transcended beyond the world. This treasure might not be able to reflect his original form." Ran Xiushu sighed and waved his hand. "There's no need for the original form. Fellow Taoist only needs to find the memories of that person." In reality, after Zhang Yan had severed the past and future, the great spiritual tablet would no longer have any qi activity left on it. Moreover, he had already achieved great virtue. However, he still had disciples in the present world, so he allowed the cultivators of the 4 tribes and even Busu Heaven to retain their memories of him. Therefore, Hong Yu only needed to visit those who knew Zhang Yan one by one and collect their memories before putting them into the great spiritual tablet. Then, he would be able to summon an incarnation that was pieced together from their memories and have a battle with that person. Hong Yu quickly understood the crux of this matter. Being able to discuss the Tao with a brilliant person was his wish, not to mention that this person wasn't simple at all. It was rare for him to be excited. He solemnly cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your reminder, fellow Taoist. If I can really discuss the Tao with that person, it would be my fortune." Chapter 2250. Feng Mo was unable to discern whether Meng Hu was real or fake, so he could only rely on his own judgment to choose one of the 2 territories. But his luck seemed to be bad, as the person he chose just happened to not be Meng Hu's real body, but his clone. However, even when he got closer, he could not tell. After sensing Zhang Chan's qi dynamic, in order to not be discovered by Zhang Chan at the same time, he threw out a ray of spiritual light from a great distance away. At this moment, Meng Hu's clone also discovered that Feng Mo was approaching, and he said excitedly, "It's time for me to make a contribution." He ignored the array disk as if it was nothing, and with a thought, he dragged Feng Mo's mind into his state of mind. In a trance, Feng Mo felt that he had fallen into a strange world. Then, he heard someone preaching a Tao technique there. After listening carefully, he suddenly realized that it was actually a spirit of creation Tao technique, and it was quite different from the one he had observed. After a slight comparison, he couldn't help but be entranced. He walked towards the source of the voice and saw a Taoist sitting in the middle of the boundless clouds. When he saw the face, he was shocked and said, "Meng Hu." Due to Meng Hu's insistence on his own cultivation, he had been suppressing that Taoist technique. As a result, the Taoist in his heart realm had already transformed into his appearance. When the Taoist saw him, he immediately stopped his lecture and sighed. Fellow Taoist's cultivation method has deviated from the right path. Feng Mo was anxious and bewildered in his heart. He guessed that this ought to be some sort of illusory realm, but the spirit of creation Tao art wasn't fake. At this moment, when he heard Feng Mo speak, he couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" The Taoist didn't speak much, and he directly displayed the profound principles of the Tao art. Of course, this Tao art was one where the user was the master, and it didn't blindly follow the Tao art itself. The method that Feng Mo learned was secretly obtained from observing others and had not been truly imparted by the spirit of creation. Now that he heard the truth, he listened as if he was intoxicated. Sometimes, he sighed, sometimes, he muttered to himself, "So that's how it is, so that's how it is. It turns out that I've gone the wrong way." He felt that this technique was extremely in line with his heart, and he firmly believed that this was the true Great Tao. For a time, he couldn't bear to leave this place, and he continuously chased and asked questions, gradually becoming engrossed in it. In reality, he had also fallen into obsession. It was obsession towards the Grand Tao. If he couldn't solve the confusion in his heart or wake up, then he wouldn't leave this place. When Meng Hu's avatar saw this, he immediately transmitted a message to Zhang Quan. Zhang Quan quickly arrived and looked at Feng Mo, who was standing blankly in midair. He glanced at the avatar and said, "You captured him?" Meng Hu's clone said proudly, "Teacher, I've said it before, Meng Hu can't compare to me." Zhang Quan couldn't be bothered to listen to him anymore. With a slap of his palm, he dispersed Feng Mo. Then he stretched out his hand and pointed. A talisman flew out and suppressed all of Feng Mo's mana. Feng Mo's qi dynamic was in a mess, and only then did he wake up. When he saw Zhang Quan, he immediately understood the situation he was in. He begged, "Zhang Shangzhen, since I've already been captured by you, can you let me go back and listen to the Tao technique?" Zhang Quan sneered and said, "Do you know that you've foolishly cultivated the spirit Tao technique of creation, and you're the enemy of all Taos? Now that your life is in danger, you still have the mood to listen to this?" Feng Mo said, "As the saying goes, if one hears the Tao in the morning, one can die in the evening." Zhang Quan interrupted him and said, "There's no need to talk about this. I can tell you that you still have a way to live." Feng Mo's spirit rose slightly. If he could live, he naturally wouldn't want to die. So, he said, "Zhang Shangzhen, please give me some pointers." Zhang Quan said, "As long as you swear that you won't spread this Tao technique in the future without my permission, and you won't submit to the Tao technique, I can spare your life." To deal with those who refuse to come to their senses, his methods would naturally be stricter, but it wouldn't be to the extent of killing them all. Even the Taoist cultivators who were captured previously, once they woke up, as long as they swore not to spread the Tao and not to submit, then he could let them go. As for those who had entered the Tao too deeply, they would forcefully cut off their memories. If they couldn't do it, then their mana would be sealed and they would be imprisoned. Feng Mo hurriedly said, "After I heard the Tao, I already know what to do, and I'm willing to follow Shangzhen's words." After saying this, he swore on the spot. At this moment, Zhang Quan asked, "What exactly did you see in those scenes from the future? Why did you stay here for so long and not leave?" Feng Mo searched his memories and revealed a bewildered expression. Zhang Quan saw that something was wrong and asked, "What's going on?" Feng Mo said, "Most of the shadows of the future that I saw have dissipated, but I still remember that there seems to be an opportunity at the mysterious mirror division, and I need to wait for a certain time. When the time comes, I'll be able to grasp it." Zhang Quan pondered for a moment, and this problem was very likely related to Meng Hu. He secretly noted down the matter of the opportunity and said, "Previously, you were able to escape my pursuit, but because of the arrival of my disciple, you revealed a flaw?" Feng Mo sighed and said, "That's right." After fellow Taoist Meng arrived, the future that I saw became abnormally vague, and I believed that if this continued, sooner or later I would be captured by your master and disciple, so I had no choice but to come up with this idea. If I had known that fellow Taoist Meng could also hear the Tao technique, I wouldn't have done this. Speaking up to this point, he earnestly asked, "Can Shangzhen allow me to meet fellow Taoist Meng? If I can hear the Tao technique face to face, I will have no regrets." Zhang Quan glanced at him and said, "Sure, as long as you don't regret it when the time comes." Mountain and Sea Realm, Mount Shockwave. Hong Yu had been in the Shaoqing sect for a long time, and had indeed paid a visit to some of his peers. Unfortunately, the almighty Shaoqing experts were either in secluded meditation, went to the outer heavens to visit the Tao, or simply stood guard in the half-realm, so he hadn't been able to meet them one by one. Fortunately, even when the Shaoqing cultivators left, they would leave behind a strand of their divine will in the sect. First, it was to guide the younger generation of disciples, and second, it was convenient for them to exchange pointers with fellow Taoists. Therefore, he had tried to ask for advice, and truly felt that he had gained a lot. He still remembered Ran Xiushu's words, and had originally planned to go to Qinsong to pay a visit. After staying for a few months, he said his goodbyes. Although Ran Xiushu had made the suggestion on a whim, he was actually very interested in it, so he decided to send a clone to accompany him to see the final outcome of the battle. Hongyu didn't mind. He had always heard that the Shaoqing and Qinsong were on good terms, and if Ran Xiushu, a Shaoqing elder, went with him, many things that he couldn't bring up could be done on his behalf. Therefore, after a few days, he went down Jingqiong Mountain with Ran Xiushu's clone. Originally, he was prepared to go straight to Qinsong School, but Ran Xiushu thought of something and suggested, "Why don't you make a trip to Huanjin Temple first, and pay a visit to Huanjin Temple's sect Master Zhang?" Back in the 9 continents, Huanjin Temple was one of the great Xianmen sections. However, in Hong Yu's impression, this sect was only good at subduing demons. If it was purely in terms of fighting techniques, it could only be said to be ordinary. He said, "May I know the reason for this?" Ran Xiushu smiled and said, "This sect Master Zhang's cultivation is also outstanding. Not to mention that he's not inferior to you and me, his achievements are already far above the founder of the sect. Now, his Dao techniques are also far superior to the predecessors. Moreover, sect Master Zhang is quite related to that person, so it's more convenient to go there to pay a visit to collect knowledge." Hong Yu felt that it was reasonable, so he turned to the southeast, and first went to Huanjin Temple, which was also on the same continent. With the help of the shifting formation altar, in less than an hour, they arrived at the Guanyun continent. The Guanyun continent was originally a barren land, and like most of the territories in the Western Absolute Domain, all kinds of ferocious monsters and demons ran amok. After Huanjin Temple occupied this place, they swept away the different species, subdued demons and demons, moved mountains and peaks, and moved the land and sea. Just now, they opened up a pure and holy place, and now there were Taoist cultivators flying in the sky everywhere. Hong Yu himself was also an elder of a great sect, and from this, it was not difficult to see the prosperity of Huanjin Temple. However, he was only focused on Dao, and thought that other than Dao, there was nothing important, so he did not say anything about it. The two came to the front of the mountain gate of Huanjin Temple, reported their names, and were then invited in. Zhang Zhen heard that the Shaoqing cultivator Ran Xiushu and the previous generation elder of Yuanyang sect came to visit together, and she also gave them face by arranging a banquet. After talking during the banquet, she heard that Hong Yu was actually looking for her brother's memory, and while she was surprised, she also felt that it was interesting. She also heard of Hong Yu's reputation, but that was in the past. Even with Ran Xiushu accompanying her, she would not agree to this matter rashly. Therefore, she discussed Dao with Hong Yu for a while, and realized that he was indeed extraordinary. After thinking for a while, she passed a part of the memory related to her brother to him. Hong Yu said in a deep voice, "Thank you, sect leader Zhang." Zhang Zhen smiled, "You don't have to thank me, but I also have a condition. If there is an outcome, I hope that you can let me know." Hong Yu agreed without hesitation. To be able to see superior Dao techniques and to be able to fight with superior opponents was his wish. As for how others would think of him if he lost, he did not care at all. Now that the purpose of coming to Huanjin Temple had been achieved, he bade farewell with Ran Xiushu. Using the altar, it did not take long for them to arrive above the Dragon Abyss Sea. Seeing that the two exalted ones came to visit, the reception elder immediately reported. Currently in Qinsong School, sect leader Qin was still in seclusion, and Mengzhen was stationed in the half-world for a long time. The person in charge of the overall situation was the Upper Extreme Hall's Vice Hall Master, Qi Yuntian. However, Ran Xiushu and Hong Yu were not the respected elders of any sect, and it was not his turn to show up. Therefore, he entrusted the matter of greeting the two to Elder Sun Jin. When Sun Jian heard that Hong Yu came to visit, he was also very interested. When he was cultivating, Hong Yu had already ascended, but he also heard of this person's reputation, so he came out to greet him personally. The three of them discussed Dao, and each of them gained something. However, what made Hong Yu regretful was that the mighty figures of Qinsong School each had their own duties, and unlike Shaoqing sect, they did not leave their divine wills there for others to challenge. Therefore, he could only choose to visit a few people. Most of them were neither cold nor warm to him, but in terms of etiquette, they all greeted him according to the reverend of a sect. This was actually common sense. After all, sects like Shaoqing sect that only focused on fighting were indeed rare, and he did not have much of a relationship with Qinsong school. Hong Yu stayed in Qinsong school for half a year, and then he found Sun Jian and told him the other purpose of his visit. Sun Jian was slightly surprised. He did not expect Hong Yu to have such an idea, and at the same time he felt that it was very interesting, so he smiled and said, "Then, Taoist Hong Yu, why don't you go to the clear nether heavenly lake to have a try? That is the place where the disciples of Shen Yuan are. Maybe you can gain something there." Chapter 2251. The Zhao Yu Heavenly Lake was above the Dragon Abyss Sea, so the news of Hong Yu's visit had already reached there. Lu Yenyi was in seclusion, but she had a doppelganger outside to manage the situation. After hearing about this, she thought for a while and wrote a talisman letter. She ordered the servant beside her, "Send this talisman letter to Guan Zhen." After Qi Yuntian took charge of the sect, many things were also handed over to the eldest disciple, Guan Inyue, to handle, so the latter could actually represent his master in many aspects. When Guan Inyue received Lu Yenyi's letter, he placed great importance on it. Seeing that she was asking if Hong Yu's matter was the intention of the sect, he didn't dare to ignore it. He personally paid a visit and said, "Benevolent Master's intention is that this is a matter of the Zhao Yu sect, so naturally it is up to the Zhao Yu sect to decide. The sect will not interfere." The Xianyuan sect was under the Taishang sect, so as long as they followed the sect rules, the Qinsong school would not specially assign them to do anything. The 5 Shangjin of the Zhao Yu Heavenly Lake would not interfere with the matters of the upper echelons of the Qinsong school. However, they were Qinsong disciples after all. If the Qinsong school was in trouble, they could not just stand by and watch. Lu Yenyi nodded slightly and said, "Thank you for informing me in person." Guan Inyue said, "We are from the same sect, Shangjin Lu, you don't have to be so polite." After Lu Yenyi sent Guan Inyue away, she thought for a while. As the eldest disciple under the Taishang sect, her every move would be deliberately magnified, so it was not suitable for her to do this personally. She needed to find a suitable person, so she ordered the disciple below, "Go and invite second junior brother here." Jiang Zheng had built a flying hut and drifted outside all year round. He was either cultivating or seeking Tao. If he met a fated person, he would often leave a few words of advice. He had the carefree demeanor of an immortal, so he was usually not in the sect. As the Yaoyin sect master, Wei Zihong stayed in the sect all year round and was not here. As for Yuan Jianqing, although he was in the Zhao Yu Heavenly Lake, he had always been not interested in the banquets. As for Hong Yu, he was the former elder of the Yuanyang sect. Not to mention his status, he had already cut off his past and future bodies. Therefore, he should be treated with courtesy. Among all the people here, only Tian Kuan was suitable. Tian Kuan arrived at the underwater residence. When he saw Lu Yenyi, he greeted politely, "Greetings, eldest senior sister." Lu Yenyi gestured with her hand and said, "Shidi, you don't have to be so polite. Let's sit and talk." Tian Kuan bowed again and sat down at the side. Lu Yenyi said, "Today there is a matter that I need Shidi to deal with." Tian Kuan said in a deep voice, "Senior martial sister, please speak." Lu Yenyi briefly explained Hong Yu's matter and said, "I'm currently in closed-door cultivation, so it's not appropriate for me to handle this matter. Junior brother will handle this matter on my behalf." Tian Kuan immediately agreed. About 100 days later, Hong Yu indeed came to visit. Tian Kuan came out to greet him, and the two of them chose a good place to meet at the top of the Heavenly Lake. After the discussion, Hong Yu knew that the purpose of his visit had already spread here, so he didn't hide it and naturally made a request. Tian Kuan said in a deep voice, "When Taoist priest came, there was news from the sect that we can pass on a portion of Master's memories to Taoist priest. However, ever since Master conquered the mountains and seas, he rarely made a move, and he never used his divine abilities in front of us. Therefore, Taoist priest's request can't be fulfilled." Hong Yu said, "Then what guidance does Tian Kuan really have?" Tian Kuan said, "If Taoist priest Hong Yu is interested, why don't you go to the Yuhuan heavens? Master once traveled there for a period of time and sparred with many Taoists. I believe that Taoist priest Hong Yu's wish can be fulfilled there. Hong Yu cupped his hands and said in thanks, "Many thanks for the information, fellow Taoist Tian." After he had escaped from the world prison, he had actually gone to the Yuhuan heavens. It was a vast place with countless great and minor worlds. However, most cultivators couldn't compare to the cultivators of the 9 continents, so in the end he returned to the mountain and sea realm to cultivate. But now it seemed that he had no choice but to go there again. As for the past whereabouts of this Tao master, it wasn't difficult to find out. He believed that as long as the master of the dark abyss heaven didn't deliberately hide it, he would be able to find some clues. However, he believed that the sects of the mountain and sea realm were stronger than the sects of the outer realms, so he didn't stop his Tao visit. After Tian Kuan saw Hong Yu off, a disciple close to him couldn't help but ask, "Shangjin, will the patriarch blame you for doing this?" Tian Kuan shook his head and said, "What kind of power does Master have? In this world, from the smallest of specks of dust to the largest of all things, what can hide from him? If he wasn't willing, then Taoist Hong Yu wouldn't have even thought of doing this. Now that he has come to find me, it shows that Master doesn't care about this." The disciple nodded and bowed his head. Disciple was rash. Tian Kuan said, "It's fine. It's just that this Taoist Hong Yu is really skilled. I heard that he once won first place in the sword duel among the various sections. He really deserves his reputation." He still remembered what Hong Yu had said just now, that he had been defeated in one move during a duel. Thinking of this gave him some inspiration. He pondered for a moment and found that the answer was right in front of him, but he still felt that there was a layer of distance between them. Fortunately, he had a calm temperament. If he couldn't figure it out for the time being, he wouldn't think too much about it. He put the matter aside for the time being and returned to Lu Yenyi to report the details. Zhang Chan had captured Feng Mo and brought him back to the subaltar. It could be considered that he had finished dealing with the matters of the Kunshe continent. He didn't want to stay here any longer, so he called Meng Hu over and said, "I have nothing to do here and need to report back to Xinyuan heaven. You stay here and don't cause trouble, lest you embarrass me." Meng Hu complained, "Master, disciple has never embarrassed Master." Zhang Chan didn't bother to scold him and said expressionlessly, "Don't release your doppelganger for no reason." Meng Hu didn't care and said, "Yes, disciple obeys." When Duan Cheng heard the two of them talking, he thought for a moment and came over to persuade, "Master Zhang, Guardian Meng has been very conscientious and diligent, and has repeatedly made great contributions. Master Zhang, don't be too demanding." Zhang Chan snorted and said, "Let's wait and see what happens." He took out a talisman from his sleeve and activated it. His figure was immediately received by a spiritual light. When he opened his eyes again, he was already in front of Qinghuan Palace. There was already a formation spirit waiting here. After exchanging a few words, he was called in. When he entered the hall and saw Zhang Yan, he quickly bowed and said, "Master, I have returned to report back." Zhang Yan already understood what had happened, so there was no need for him to report again. After praising him with words, he gave him a lot of great medicines. After Zhang Chan thanked him, he said, "Master, there is one more thing." Feng Mo said that he saw a great opportunity in the mysterious mirror subaltar in the future. I thought that with his cultivation, there would be very few things that could move him, so I was suspicious. Could it be Zhou Huanyuan Jade? Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Looks like I can entrust you with such matters in the future." "Your guess is right." Zhang Chan was overjoyed and said, "Thank you for your praise, Master. I am willing to share Master's worries." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You can leave first, I will call you if there is anything." "I will take my leave." Zhang Chan bowed and left. After he retreated, Zhang Yan looked at Bu Shutian. The mighty force of the great virtue that had opened the world imprisoning chaos sky kept retreating after the mighty force of the spirit of creation arrived. It even fell into the bodies of some creatures. This time, Feng Mo's matter was not a simple glimpse of the future. In fact, after the creation spirit Whaley's clone fell into the world, it swallowed the ownerless Whaley everywhere. The Whaley that came from the prison world didn't want to do that, so it hid everywhere. This mighty force had already been deployed in the 9 continents. Although its actions were not like those of the four patriarchs, it still followed them closely and even captured all the cultivators that ascended outside of the four great sects of the 9 continents. Most importantly, it was connected to Bushutian, so it could be said that its roots were very deep. Because of this, it was not immediately invaded by the mighty force of the spirit of good fortune. This was also the reason why the Weili, which was originally attached to Feng Mo's body, gradually left after getting close to Meng Hu. It was because it had sensed the existence of the creation spirit. Although there were differences between the creation spirit, the Weili didn't have any spirituality, so it naturally couldn't distinguish between them. The various great virtue Weili had different purposes in investing in the present world. Some were still hard to see, some were like Ji Zhuang, Wei Ming, and the others. They wanted to choose someone to step into the spirit refinement realm and replace them to bear the tribulation power. This way, the owner of the Weili would have a high chance of returning to the world. However, these people had to be chosen from the cultivators of the mortal transformation realm. Previously, Shin Chong didn't accept the primordial jade, so he avoided it once. This caused the Weili to deviate from the fixed direction, so they could only choose other suitable people, and Feng Mo should be one of them. The other obstacle here was the return of Zhou Yuan Jade. Without this item, no matter how talented one was, no matter how great one's abilities were, it would be impossible to cross that barrier. However, there were countless appearances, so naturally there were opportunities. For example, there was such an opportunity in the Mirror Lake. Zhang Yan previously returned the 5 people of Dao Yuanzun and arranged for them to be here. Although there wasn't any heretic Yuanzun here, there were Luoism, Xingjiao, Dejiao, and other almighty people's Dao preaching sections. Once karma was stirred up, it wouldn't be inferior to the battle between the people of Dao and the heretic in Busu heaven. Therefore, if everything went smoothly without any obstacles, the Mirror Lake would definitely have the Zhou Huanyuan Jade enter the world. There was no one here who could compete with him, so the primordial jade would definitely fall into his hands. As for the person who entrusted it to him, he already had a plan. While he was thinking, he sensed streams of flowing light flashing. He raised his eyes and looked towards the void. It was the Taoist that the creation spirit Weili had transformed into released a ray of treasure light. As soon as the brilliance came out, it resonated with the many appearances. Instantly, countless lights bloomed, and everything that could be sensed was the same. In an instant, all the Vedanta seemed to be surrounded by this light. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. It turned out that the creation spirit had such a trick. It could actually merge many appearances with its own Weili temporarily. If Feng Du and the rest could not break through this Dao technique, then it was very likely that all things would collapse. Next, it would depend on how Hong Du and the rest would deal with it. At this stage, he would definitely not allow the creation spirit to have a foothold among all things. If these few people could not solve this matter, he would come down and try to get rid of this person. Chapter 2252. As soon as the Taoist transformed from the creation spirit used this method, Xiang Ju and the others immediately fell into a predicament. The treasure lights that had bloomed together with the countless worlds also contained the mighty power of the spirit of creation. Right now, the Taoist transformed from the spirit of creation was already devouring their mighty power. With the addition of the light shining on them, if they couldn't stop it in time, it would definitely become stronger and stronger until it devoured them. But in reality, the most dangerous thing was not this matter, but Taoist Feng Du's current attitude. Xiang Ju's divine will transmitted, fellow Taoists, you must persuade fellow Taoist Feng Du, you must not let him let the creation spirit overturn everything. Wei Ming replied, fellow Taoist Feng Du won't do that, right? Xiang Ju said, you're wrong. Fellow Taoist Feng Du has always done things according to his heart. It's fine as long as he can achieve his goal. If he feels that destroying everything can weaken the creation spirit's strength, then he will most likely do it. When everyone heard this, their expressions changed slightly. Ji Zhuang saw that Wei Ming and Heng Wu were moved, but he said, fellow Taoists, I don't think we should go persuade him. After stopping them, he said in a low voice, even though fellow Feng Du pulled us here, he didn't treat us as help. He definitely won't pay attention to us. Perhaps the more we try to persuade him, the worse it will become. Wei Ming frowned and said, "Are we going to watch everything collapse?" Ji Zhuang said, "That might not be the case. With fellow Taoist Feng Du's personality, how can he retreat in the face of a strong enemy? Besides, I don't think that Bu Xiutian will watch everything collapse, right? You guys are really worrying too much." Feng Du indeed didn't have any thoughts of retreating at this moment, but it wasn't because he wanted to save everything, but because he didn't want to lose to the other party in a contest of Dao techniques. In his opinion, he judged the other party with Dao sounds, and the other party responded with the contract. This was using Dao to fight for Dao. If he didn't fight the enemy head-on and use some tricks, then he would be avoiding the battle. This was something that his heart wouldn't allow. When he thought up to here, he immediately deduced in his heart with the intention of dispelling this Dao technique. However, if he couldn't break it in time and no one could stop him, the final result would be a complete collapse. Apart from Bu Su Tian and the Mirror Lake, which were rich in creation essence, the rest of the realms would be destroyed. The Taoist transformed by the spirit of creation was also trying to decipher Hong Du's Dao voice, but the latter's Dao technique was equally brilliant. Whoever could resolve the other's technique first would have the absolute advantage, especially since both of their techniques would directly determine the outcome of the battle. Thus, if either side lost the opportunity, it could directly cause them to lose the chance to recover from the disadvantage. In Bu Su Tian, Zhang Yan was watching the battle at the moment, and he was also performing a Taoist deduction in his heart. When the two of them fought, they would naturally display their Dao. As a bystander, he stood at a different point of view so he could clearly see the changes in their Dao. However, he didn't want to just sit back and watch. The spirit of creation was the enemy of all Vedanta, so he naturally had to be prepared if Feng Du and the others couldn't win. The battle between Vedanta was a battle of their own Dao techniques. Normally, if one had the advantage in strength, one could naturally fight against many. This was because when one used a technique, the opponent might not be able to resolve the mysteries within, so there was no way to talk about a counterattack. Even if one used an attack, it would be easily broken. However, when the strength of both sides was similar, the comprehension of the Dao laws required a great deal of concentration. If there was another opponent at this time, then the deduction would naturally be insufficient. However, he was different. Compared to others, he had an advantage, and that was the remnant of the jade. When he resolved an opponent's Dao technique, he could use the remnant of the jade to deduce against another person. If this method was used against one person, then the advantage would be almost overwhelming. Even when facing two opponents of similar levels, he could still be calm. Therefore, he was currently resolving two Dao techniques at the same time. The spirit of creation had now tied itself to all the worlds. If all the worlds collapsed and he wanted to re-establish it, then he would have to gather all of Pauline. In this case, he would have to wait for all the Vedanta to return. During the wait, not only would he not be able to find the land of creation, but it would also be difficult to find the rest of Pauline's Qi activity. Therefore, if Hong Du couldn't resolve this technique, once he understood the mysteries within, he would naturally do it for Hong Du. As he stared at the scene, he realized that due to the great power of the spirit of creation climbing above many of the real worlds, the influence of the real worlds on them was not shallow. Normal real worlds were fine. For spirit refinement cultivators, they would be destroyed in an instant. However, the real worlds attached to the land of creation were everlasting. If the great power of the spirit of creation seeped into them, it would not be a good thing. He pondered for a while. Although a little Weili would not affect the Vedanta, it would have a significant impact on the spirit of creation. The spirit of creation had two purposes. One was to deal with Hong Du and the others, and the other was to infect all living beings. Obviously, it also wanted to seize the Dao technique behind the spirit of creation. Now that the Vedanta were not in the mood to care about this matter, he needed to stop it. With this thought, he released the Weili and entered the worlds. Although the problem could not be solved if the Taoist transformed by the spirit of creation was not eliminated, once his Weili joined in, the violent infiltration of the spirit of creation Weili was continuously dispelled. As long as the Dao technique of the spirit of creation was not spread, it would not matter. Although many realms had been triggered, Bu Shutian was not involved since he was personally suppressing them. The rest of the places of fortune and the Mirror Lake were also gradually calmed down under his suppression. However, there were cultivators who adhered to the Tao technique of the spirit of creation. Because of the support of the Weili, their cultivation would improve faster. However, in his eyes, these people were insignificant. If they stood on the side of the Luo denomination, the Virtue denomination, and the Xingism denomination, then he could rely on the Yen denomination to solve the problem. If it was necessary, he could also ask for external tributes. If they stood on the opposite side of the various Taoists, then there was no harm. The Tao technique came from battle, and with the birth of the Origin Jade, it was not a bad thing to have so many opponents stirring up karma. In the mountain and sea realm, Hong Yu and Ran Xiushu stayed in the Qinsong school for a few months before taking their leave. According to the original plan, their next stop should be the Earth Abyss in search of the Origin Mirage Gate. However, Tian Kuan said that they needed to go to the Yu Huai Heavens. Ran Xiushu said, "Fellow Taoist, are you going to go to the Outer Heavens now? There's a denomination called the Yen denomination, and they can use the Realm Gate to go to the other heavens. It's convenient to go there." Hong Yu said, "When I was discussing the Tao with fellow Taoists from the Qinsong school, I heard that that person had dealings with fellow Taoists from various sects in the 9 continents. I'd like to visit them one by one before going to the Yu Huai Heavens." Since he was going to search for memories, the more complete and detailed it was, the better. For a person like that, everyone must have seen different things. That way, when pieced together, the picture would be nearly complete. Ran Xiushu thought for a moment, then said, "I heard that the Clear Feather Sect master, Tao Zhenhong, had a good relationship with that person. Fellow Taoist, why don't you pay him a visit?" Hong Yu nodded. After returning to the mountain and sea realm, he had heard of the Clear Feather Sect in the Wing Sky continent, and it was not far from here. Suddenly, he thought of something and said, "Since we're going to this place, I might as well pay a visit to a sect on the way." Ran Xiushu said, "Which sect?" Hong Yu said in a low voice, "The Guangyuan sect." Shen Chong was from the Guangyuan sect, and Hong Yu had lost to him twice. Therefore, he wanted to pay a visit to the sect and learn some Taoist techniques. Ran Xiushu thought for a moment, then said, "The current Guangyuan sect master is only in the Grotto Heaven realm, but there's a fellow Taoist Yang who has severed his mortal body not too long ago." Hong Yu said, "That's good. I'll discuss Taoist techniques with that fellow Taoist." Even if that person was not a cultivator who could sever the past and the future, as long as he was a cultivator who had shed his mortal body, he would still be able to display superior Taoist techniques in the divine decree. That was enough. Ran Xiushu thought for a moment, then smiled. Anyway, he had nothing to do, and he just wanted to see what the final outcome would be. It didn't matter where he went. In fact, he was eager to make some noise, so he said, "Then I'll go with fellow Taoist." The Stream Wind continent was located at the south of the northern cold abyss. After the Guangyuan sect crossed over from the 9 continents, they built their sect here. Originally, this was a broken and barren continent without a name. Therefore, everyone in the sect gave this place its old name. To the west of this continent was where the Blue Feather Pavilion was, and further to the east was Pernyuan sect, which was adjacent to the outer seas. Just to the south, there was a large tribe called the Heart Butterfly tribe. Although this demon tribe had long pledged allegiance to the sects of the 9 continents and made an oath, they were still a different species after all. Therefore, the sects of the 9 continents were still wary of them. The original intention of the Guangyuan sect's establishment here was to be at the forefront to guard against this demon tribe. However, with the rise of the sects of the 9 continents, this purpose had gradually disappeared. However, if the Guangyuan sect wanted to expand outwards, because all 3 sides were on the same path, they could only continue southward, which would definitely cause conflict with the Heart Butterfly tribe. In the past, because of the existence of the Heart Butterfly tribe's demon ancestor, although she was in a deep sleep, she did not reveal anything. However, after Yang Miaoxing severed her mortal body, she had been intentionally or unintentionally invading the territory of the Heart Butterfly tribe for the past few decades. The visit of Hong Yu and Ran Xiushu made the Guangyuan sect's sect leader Lin very surprised. Even without mentioning their identities, these two people were top-notch, so he personally came out to welcome them. When he heard that the two of them were here to visit elder Yang Miaoxing, he first greeted them warmly, then sent people to look for them. At this moment, Hong Yu suddenly felt something and looked in a certain direction. He saw a young girl with her hair combed into two buns, dressed in a lake green dress, sitting on the Thousand Autumns, swaying back and forth. She looked extremely bored, but just now, he saw that there was a golden light shining from her body, blocking his sight. The next moment, he felt something and accepted it. As soon as he entered, he saw that the young girl just now was looking at him curiously. He cupped his hands and said, "Are you fellow Taoist Yang of Guangyin sect? I, Hong Yu, have long heard of the reputation of Guangyin sect, so I have specially come to pay a visit." Yang Miaoxing, on the other hand, made a sound of surprise. She sniffed at him, then used her index finger to touch her lower lip, and muttered to herself, "Is he under a talisman spell? Why doesn't it look like it?" Chapter 2253. Talisman Technique? Hong Yu pondered for a while and felt that it must have been left behind after his fight with Shen Chong. A person like Shen Chong would not do anything to him, nor would he bother to do so. The greatest possibility was that it was the repercussions of the perfect fusion technique. Falling from the peak was not a small matter. In battle, even a little difference would be a huge difference. Therefore, Ran Xiushu regretted that he could not fight with Shen Chong when he was in perfect condition. He originally thought that the biggest problem here was the state of mind, because he had become overly cautious and conservative when fighting. This was something that could not be helped. Because every time he attacked, he would think of Shen Chong's methods and would naturally be on guard against such changes. Therefore, no matter if it was the changes in his techniques or his mana, he could not use them smoothly. It was equivalent to having a crack on the originally flawless mirror. No matter how small it was, it would drag the whole thing down. Previously, he could not find a solution no matter what, so he went around visiting fellow Taoists with the intention of solving this problem. But now, it seemed that it was not just that. He said in a low voice, "I have something to ask fellow Taoist, fellow Taoist?" He called out a few times, but there was no response from the other side. He looked up and saw that Yang Miaoxing had transformed into countless talisman in front of him. Her fingers were fiddling around as if she was calculating something. Sometimes she was deep in thought, sometimes she stomped her feet in annoyance, and sometimes she was exclaiming. With one look, Hong Yu knew that she was in a state of enlightenment. It should be the so-called talisman technique that he had on him that inspired her. This was a good thing, because she might be able to solve his problem. Therefore, he did not disturb her, but waited quietly at the side. But after a long time, he saw that Yang Miaoxing had no intention of stopping, and he felt that something was wrong. They had stayed here for too long. After a mortal metamorphosis cultivator entered the inexplicable state, he could perform countless calculations, but this also consumed his divine will. Once the divine will was used up, he would need to use his own origin to replenish it. He was a cultivator who had severed his past and future body, so naturally his divine decree was abundant. However, Yang Miaoxing had only severed her mortal body, so the divine decree she possessed could not be compared to his. If she continued to immerse herself in this, it would cause some problems, and he did not want to see that happen. He called out twice more, and Yang Miaoxing came back to her senses, but she did not seem to be acting strangely. She bowed and said, "Thank you for reminding me." She looked indifferent, but in her heart she was screaming, "How embarrassing, how embarrassing." Hong Yu said, "It's nothing." He looked at Yang Miaoxing and saw that there was nothing wrong with her. But if something happened, it wouldn't be good. So he said, "Since I'm a guest at your sect leader's place, why don't I come and meet you later?" Yang Miaoxing blinked her eyes and said, "You don't have to worry about me, my friend. I have the spirit-nourishing talisman planted in my Dharmakaya. As long as I'm in the mountain gate, I won't be able to use up my spirit in a short period of time." "Is that so?" Hong Yu pondered for a moment, then asked, "Fellow Taoist, just now, you seem to have seen a talisman technique on my body. I wonder what's going on? Could you tell me?" Yang Miaoxing didn't hide anything and said, there's nothing that I can't say. That's because there are traces of talisman techniques in your divine qi, she said with a face full of curiosity. Where did you get this from? Hong Yu said, before I came here, I once sparred with a fellow Taoist from your sect. His Tao technique was much better than mine, and he defeated me with one move. Maybe I was invaded by his divine art. According to what fellow Taoist said, maybe this really is some kind of talisman technique? Yang Miaoxing was confused. He's from the same sect as my Guangyuan sect? However, there doesn't seem to be such a person in my Guangyuan sect. She suddenly widened her eyes. There was no such person now, but it didn't mean that there was no such person in the past. She remembered that there was indeed a very powerful senior in her family who had ascended to another world when she was still in the 9 continents. She asked tentatively, Taoist priest, are you talking about Elder Shin? Hong Yu nodded silently and said, that's him. Yang Miaoxing's eyes lit up and she said excitedly, no wonder, no wonder. Elder Shin is my Guangyuan sect's senior. Even though he carried on the past and created a new mystical technique, no matter what, he still entered the path of Tao through talismans. Since fellow Taoist was hit by a divine art or a Tao technique, that means you were hit by a talisman technique. However, there's still something wrong. She pointed at her lips again and her eyes lit up. She hurriedly asked, the level of divine art that fellow Taoist was hit by, was it sent by Elder Shin's divine will? Hong Yu couldn't help but look at her. He was rather impressed in his heart. He didn't say the exact details, but Yang Miaoxing was able to deduce the truth with just a few clues. Even though her cultivation wasn't high, she was indeed quite capable. He said, that's right. Yang Miaoxing said, that's right. That senior's divine will was actually kept by fellow Taoist. That's why I was able to see the traces. However, if this continues, fellow Taoist's original cultivation will definitely be affected. Hong Yu was silent for a moment and asked, does fellow Taoist have a solution? This is very troublesome. Yang Miaoxing's eyes turned and she said, but it's not that there's no way. Why don't fellow Taoists stay for a few more days? She waved her hand again and said, but it's all up to fellow Taoist, I won't force you. She pretended to be indifferent on the surface, but in her heart she was thinking, hurry up and agree, hurry up and agree. Life is so boring, how can I not investigate this matter properly? Hong Yu frowned. He had a bad feeling in his heart, but Yang Miaoxing had seen the real problem in his body and had a solution, so he didn't want to miss it. After all, he didn't want to have a flaw in his own body when he fought with the Shadow Master of Xian Yuantian Heaven, so he said, since fellow Taoist Yang has invited me, I'll stay here for a few more days. In Qinghuan Palace, after some calculations, Zhang Yan had deciphered the Tao techniques of Fengdu and the Taoist, transformed from the spirit of creation. In other words, if he were to make a move now, he could break the magical powers of both of them. But it couldn't be said that the Tao techniques of both of them were not brilliant. Both of them were fighting, guarding against each other, and the Weili were still colliding with each other. Now that he had no such burden, it was relatively easy for him to decipher them. Taoist Fengdu seemed to have turned a blind eye to the treasure light around him, and the Tao sound from his mouth didn't stop. Instead, it became louder. Xiang Ju and the others persisted under the treasure light of the Taoist for a while, but they found that the pressure was not as great as they had imagined. Although the Taoist had made use of countless real worlds, in their eyes, the real worlds would be destroyed in an instant. Even though they would be reborn due to the collision of various mighty forces, there was still a limit to it. After a certain point, there would be no more improvement. At this time, they gradually noticed that Taoist Fengdu's aura was constantly rising. After discussing with each other, they believed that Fengdu was gradually gaining the upper hand. If this continued, if there were no changes, the moment the Tao sound ended, the Taoist opposite them would be banished into eternal silence, and the spirit of creation would lose a part of its power forever, never to be recovered. However, they didn't think that it would be so easy to take down the incarnation of the spirit of creation. Even if they could restrain it with their Tao techniques, before it was banished, it was very likely that the Taoist would fight to the death and overturn everything. Even if they won, they would lose more than they would gain. Once everything collapsed, there would be no way to find a way to complete the Tao technique. When the spirit of creation's true body descended, they might not be able to win. Zhang Yan also thought that the spirit of creation would not be willing to be banished so easily. However, his eyes were not on the Taoist, but on Xiangju and the others. He had suspected that the Tao technique might be replaced among the four. If it came to a critical moment, it might not be able to help but attack in an attempt to save the situation. At this moment, after a long period of calculation, Taoist Fengdu was the first to decipher the Tao technique. His eyes shone brightly, and he waved his sleeve heavily. The treasure light in the surroundings suddenly dimmed, and in the blink of an eye, all the light retreated until it fell into nothingness. Taoist Fengdu's spirits were lifted. Previously, he had been burdened by the treasure light, so he had to slow down his chanting. Now that he was free, the Tao sound immediately rose again. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. It was not unreasonable for this person to be so confident earlier. He did have some ability. Even though he was in Bushutian, he could feel that the Tao sound was gradually coming to an end. If the spirit of creation had any killing moves, it was about time to reveal them. At this moment, Hongdu transmitted a message with his divine will: "The four of you, go and watch the incarnation. Don't let anything happen over there." When Xiangju and the others heard this, they didn't dare to be negligent. They immediately focused their attention on the purple-robed Taoist. The spirit of creation was about to be expelled, but now was also the most dangerous time. Without thinking too much, they knew that it would definitely do something, and it was very likely to use the purple-robed Taoist to make a fuss. When the Taoist saw that his Tao technique was broken, he stretched out his hand and grabbed. Strands of colored glaze immortal light were born from nothingness like silk ribbons, and then fell into everything. Taoist Fengdu felt his body stiffen, as if he was trapped in a cocoon. He immediately judged that this divine power was not as difficult to deal with as it was just now, nor was it too threatening. However, no matter what, he still needed to calculate and decipher it before he could break it. Therefore, this method was undoubtedly to hold him back so that it would be convenient for him to use other tricks. At this moment, Xiangju and the others were also trapped. Because of the difference in their Tao techniques, just now, they were helpless against the treasured light, and there was no way for them to break this technique. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He was also affected by the Taoist Weili, but he was backed by Bu Shutin. After all, the Weili was not like the lotus of creation, which could quietly seep in. After passing through many obstacles, it was already very weak when it fell on his body. At this moment, he didn't perform any deduction. His body of strength only struggled slightly, and he got rid of the restraint. At the same time, the aura outside his body fluctuated slightly and surged continuously. The mighty power of Bushutian and the land of creation had been mobilized by him. If the Taoist will wanted to destroy everything, and Taoist Fengdu could not stop it, then he could release these powers with just a thought and use them to suppress the Taoist's mighty power. Chapter 2254. After the Taoist, transformed by the creation spirit, trapped everyone, he spread his arms and flung his sleeves. In an instant, everyone present felt an insurmountable gap between them and the others. Even their divine wills could not be transmitted. Even though Taoist Fengdu was restrained at this moment, it was unable to obstruct his judgment of the situation of the battle. When he saw that Taoist Fengdu repeatedly utilized such abilities, he instantly knew that Taoist Fengdu was unable to deal with it before the voice of the Tao came to an end. Otherwise, there would be utterly no need for this. What he was doing at the moment was not to seek a way out, but to fight for as many results as possible before he was expelled. After the Taoist used his magical power, the treasure light on his body turned and shrouded Xiangjue and the others. He directed most of the Weili on his body towards them. Xiangjue and the others immediately felt the pressure increase. Previously, the Taoist was just casually suppressing them, and his main target was Hongdu. Now, it seemed that he was targeting them. Hongdu was now trapped and could not come out before the Tao method was unraveled. Obviously, he could not help them. However, they were not afraid. After all, as a great virtue, even if the Weili was not complete, it would not be so easy to take them down. As long as they could survive this, even if Fengdu could not break through the barrier, once the Tao voice ended, the Taoist would be banished into eternal silence. The Taoist stretched out his finger and pointed. The qi dynamic of Xiangjue and the others suddenly became chaotic. This was what had seeped into their bodies when they were summoning the creation spirit into the Weili. However, this was unavoidable. Fortunately, they were already vigilant about this and did not panic. They all turned their Weili to suppress it. At this moment, the foreign Weili was still constantly invading them, and there was a qi dynamic inside. It could be said that they were being pressured both inside and outside. However, they knew that there was no way out and they had to find a way to endure it. At this moment, the layer of glazed light on the Taoist's face dimmed, and two glowing eyes appeared. At the same time, the qi dynamic of his body suddenly rose to a level. At this moment, Xiangjue and the others were alarmed. Before they could feel anything, their minds were in a trance. They found that there seemed to be a bottomless hole in their divine wills. Their minds felt like they were sinking, and they could not stop themselves. They could only watch as they slowly slid into the hole. Taoist Fengdu looked at the scene coldly. It was clearly a critical moment. No matter what the Taoist wanted to do, he must find a way to stop it. As he tried his best to deduce, he was soon able to resolve the Taoist technique that was binding his body. However, even with that, there was still an obstacle that the Taoist had set up in front of him. Right now, he could just toss the four of them aside and ignore them. However, he felt that since he was the one who had recruited these people to work for him, he couldn't allow them to be taken away. Even if his Tao voice slowed down slightly because of this, he still had to do it. His qi will changed, and a Hongdou walked out of his body. He took a step forward and slammed into the barrier, instantly dispersing the mighty force within. This was because he could see that the Taoist was only using Weili to block it. There was no need for him to dispel it, so he used the most direct method to break it. Although he had only broken the barrier between him and the Taoist, it was enough. Once his Weili pressed on, the Taoist could no longer pose a threat to Xiangjue and the others. When the Taoist saw this, he waved his sleeves and set up layers of barriers to stop the Weili from coming over. Hongdu sneered. It seemed that the Taoist had no more tricks up his sleeves. He controlled the Weili to surge forward, breaking through the barriers, and his chanting became louder. After fighting like this for a long time, the Taoist Fengdu finally came to an end. The Taoist clearly foresaw what would happen to him. After setting up layers of barriers, he took out a spell, and the light on his body suddenly shone. With a loud bang, endless Weili exploded in the surroundings. The expressions of Xiangjue and the others changed. They thought that he was trying to destroy everything, but in the next moment, they found that they were wrong. He did not do this. Instead, like the previous incarnation of the Weili, he collapsed and threw his Weili into the many worlds. Fengdu's chanting had already come to an end. As the last Taoist Fengdu spoke, the Weili spirits of creation that had yet to fall were driven into eternal silence. However, because he was a step too late, a small portion of them escaped, so it could only be said that he had completed half of his mission. When Zhang Yan saw this, his eyes flashed. It wasn't difficult for him to discern that this sort of escape wasn't something that the Taoist formed from the mighty power of the spirit of creation had planned from the beginning. Instead, his actions were naturally in line with the Tao. When faced with an irreversible situation, he would instinctively find a path that was beneficial to him. His heart stirred slightly and he couldn't help but ponder. From the looks of it, the spirit of creation's way of doing things was traceable, and this might be because the person wasn't the original. From the looks of it, if the method was appropriate, he might be able to make use of this to do something. On the other hand, Xiangjue and the others did not see any changes until the spirit of creation's Weili dissipated. It could not be said that there was no substitute among the four of them, because from the situation, even if someone stood on the Taoist side, it would be difficult to change anything. The Taoist might have seen this and decided not to use it. Apart from that, there was another possibility, and that was that it was not the original spirit of creation and could not use the substitute. As for the truth, it would take time to determine it. Feng Du stood alone in the field, his expression extremely solemn. Although he had successfully expelled the incarnation of the spirit of creation, he was very dissatisfied because a small portion of the Wei spirit was left behind. He felt that there was a thorn in his heart, and it was very uncomfortable. At this time, Xiangjue came up and said, "Congratulations, fellow Taoist, for driving the incarnation of the spirit of creation into eternal silence." Feng Du said coldly, "Do you think this battle can be considered complete?" Xiangjue said with a smile, "Even if a part of the incarnation of the spirit of creation escaped, most of it was destroyed by fellow Taoist. Its original body will never be able to recover this part of the power, and the threat it will face in the future will be greatly reduced. As for the completion that fellow Taoist said, how can there be a truly perfect thing in the world?" Hong Du raised his head and said, "That may not be impossible." Xiangjue said, "What do you plan to do?" Looking at the countless lives and deaths, Taoist Feng Du said, "As long as everything is destroyed, then the power that the spirit of creation has sneaked into it can naturally be destroyed." When Xiangjue and the others heard this, they couldn't help but be shocked. It was not easy for them to protect everything and expel the spirit of creation from the Wei spirit. Why did Hong Du suddenly want to do this? Wei Ming said, "Fellow Taoist, we can slowly find a way to deal with the scattered Wei spirit, but once everything is broken, we can only wait for all the Vedanta to return and gather all the creation Pauline. Otherwise, before that, we won't be able to find the essence of creation, and we won't be able to feel the missing Tao. This is obviously disadvantageous to fighting against the spirit of creation." Hung Wu also advised, "That's right, fellow Taoist, you must be careful. What fell today is only a Wei incarnation of the spirit of creation, and the original body is still behind it. It's not worth doing this." Although everyone was advising, it was all useless because Hong Du didn't take their words to heart at all. He felt that the opinions of Xiangjue and the others weren't important at all. Just now, during the battle, the four of them didn't have much use, so in his eyes, there was no difference whether they were there or not. He snorted coldly and said, "If the original body of the spirit of creation comes, I will naturally fight against it. What are you all worried about?" Han Wu questioned, "But what if fellow Taoist is defeated?" Feng Du said, "What a joke. How can I lose?" Everyone had a headache. Hong Du wasn't bragging, nor was he arrogant, but he was saying something that was natural. Before he really failed, he would never think that he would fail. Wei Ming said, "But fellow Taoist, you also said before that you will lead us to destroy the spirit of creation, which means that this matter isn't completely under your control. You misjudged this time, so how can you guarantee that you will succeed next time?" As soon as these words came out, the rest of the people secretly cursed in their hearts. Weren't these words urging Hong Do to do such a thing? As expected, Hong Do glanced at him and said, "That's why I need to correct this mistake now. As long as I destroy everything, the great power of the spirit of creation will be destroyed as well. Then, there won't be such a thing, right?" Xiangjue could see that Hong Du had clearly made up his mind. At this time, it was impossible to persuade him back. He immediately transmitted his divine will to everyone. "Fellow Taoists, the situation isn't right. We must stop Feng Du no matter what. We can't let him destroy Zhuyu. Otherwise, how can we fight against the spirit of creation?" Wei Ming said, "Even if we have to fight with numbers, we can't be Feng Du's opponent. If he uses the Tao technique just now, we may be driven into eternal silence." Everyone's hearts trembled. This was very possible, and they wavered for a moment. If they backed down, Hong Do would definitely not deliberately target them. Hung Wu thought about it and said, "But Hong Du is so powerful that Taoist Xinyuan may not agree to fight against him. Plus, he still has Bu Shutian to protect him. Even if Zhu Yu is destroyed, it won't affect him." Xiangjue changed his mind and said, "Fellow Taoist Ji Zhuang, can you say a few words to Taoist Xinyuan and tell him about the power of this?" Ji Zhuang said in a low voice, "There's no need to beg. If that person is willing, he will definitely protect Zhuyu. If not, no matter how you beg, it will be useless." The four of them discussed, and the Wei on their bodies surged. They rushed towards Hong Du one step ahead. Hong Du showed a look of disdain. With a wave of his sleeve, a vast Weili pressed against the four of them. At the same time, the qi dynamic on his body fluctuated. It looked like once it exploded, Zhu Yu would be destroyed. Zhang Yan had a clear view of the situation here. Taoist Feng Du said that he wanted to destroy Zhu Yu. In this way, he could destroy the creation spirit Weili. He immediately knew that it was not a joke. He really wanted to do it. Just now, after he understood Feng Du's Dao technique, he had a slight understanding of the latter's Dao. Only when one satisfied his own heart and did what he believed in, could his Dao technique be able to improve. Even his fighting ability would become stronger. But if he could not let his heart be free, then not only would his Dao technique not be able to improve, it might even become stagnant. This was the most fundamental reason why he insisted on destroying the remaining creation spirit Weili. But no matter what, he could not let him do this. So he took a step forward and walked out of Bushutian. Chapter 2255. Although Xiang Ju and the others were suppressed in the Weili, they soon realized that they were not completely powerless to fight back. Previously, when they were fighting against the incarnation of the creation spirit Weili, they were always at a disadvantage. That was because the creation spirit could steal the Tao of the Weili of great virtue and had a natural advantage. As long as there was no Weili that was equal to or similar to the creation spirit, they would definitely be suppressed. But now it was not the case. Hongdu was also a great virtue like them, but he did not have the ability to steal the Weili. Although his cultivation of Tao was higher than theirs, he did not have the ability to do so like the creation spirit. When the four saw the situation, they were slightly relieved. They did not have the confidence to defeat Hongdu, but now they just wanted to stop him and prevent him from destroying everything. This was still possible. Taoist Feng Du was a little impatient at the moment. He wanted to suppress the four of them and then do what he thought he should do, but he did not expect to be stopped. Although the four of them were not as strong as him, it was not easy to subdue them. At least, he could not block them as easily as the creation spirit. He was indeed better than the four of them in the Weili, but now he could not directly surpass them and wait for the Weili to destroy everything. Most importantly, he did not achieve his goal of destroying the incarnation of the Weili of the creation spirit this time, causing his mind to be disturbed. Therefore, the operation of his Tao was sluggish, and it was not as smooth as before. It could be said that not only did he not improve, but it had also decreased. Hongdu wanted to relax his Weili a few times, but he could not do it every time. Although the four of them could not defeat him, it was much easier for them to stop him. This made him more and more annoyed, and he said coldly, "All of you, get out of my way, don't hinder me. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." He suddenly stopped and picked up a spell. Suddenly, a shadow of Feng Du that looked exactly like him walked out of his body, but it crossed the layers of Weili in an instant and rushed toward the four of them. In this short period of time, the four of them could not understand the Tao, nor could they see the mystery in it. There was no other way but to avoid it. Just now, when they wanted to avoid it, they realized that Hongdu's Weili was expanding outward. If they did not stop it, everything would be destroyed. They had no choice but to stop it again. But this delay allowed the shadow to rush over and enter Xiangjue's body. Xiangjue immediately felt that his Weili was in a mess, as if there was another person competing with him for the power of the Weili. He quickly gathered his mind and tried to suppress it. At the same time, 3 more shadows walked out from Hongdu's side, heading towards Wei Ming, Hing Wu, and Ji Zhuang respectively. Under the influence of his mighty power, no one could avoid it, and all of them were submerged into the bodies of the shadows. Wei Ming and the other 2 also felt that it was difficult to use their own mighty power, so they had no choice but to cast spells to expel it. After using this method, Hongdu seemed to be unable to attack, but he did not intend to do so. He was only temporarily trapping the 4 of them. In this way, he could free up his hands and overturn everything. When it was done, even if the 4 of them escaped, they would not be entangled in this matter anymore. He stretched out his hand and pointed it upward. Suddenly, the boundless Weili surged violently under his control. It seemed that everything would collapse and everything would be destroyed in the next moment. But at that moment he seemed to feel something and stopped what he was doing. He turned around and saw a Taoist with qi under his feet and 5 lights on his back walking out of the sky. His expression became serious. He stared at the person and asked, "Taoist Xianyuan, do you also want to stop me?" He was not polite to Xiangjue and the others because their strength was not as good as his. But he could not feel the specific strength of Zhang Yan. He only knew that Zhang Yan was not weaker than him, so he was careful with his words. In a sense, it could be said that he respected the strong and bullied the weak, but for him, there was nothing to be embarrassed about. His own way was to follow his heart. He would do whatever he wanted and do whatever he wanted. Most people would treat those who were powerful and those who were weak differently. It was just that he expressed it more directly and thoroughly. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I cannot interfere with what you did before, but if you want to destroy everything it involves too many things, so I can't just sit and watch." Feng Du said, "Why do you worry about this? You have Bushutian in your hand. Even if everything is damaged, you still have a place to live. But the spirit of creation, the Weili, is different. If I don't get rid of them this time, the next time the real body comes, these Weili will return to my body. That will be even more difficult to deal with, so I have to do it." Zhang Yan said, "Ask yourself, is this really the only way to get rid of the Weili? We can think of another way to get rid of them." Feng Du said disapprovingly, "How long will it take? It is not as good as getting rid of them once and for all." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Let's not talk about this anymore. Once everything is destroyed, the missing Tao will be hard to find. It is too much of a price to pay." Feng Du said, "This is just a small matter." Zhang Yan said with a deep gaze, "It may seem like a small matter to you, but your action is blocking everyone from finding the Tao, and it is also blocking me from finding the Tao. How can I not stop you?" Feng Du's expression turned cold and he said, "If that is the case, then I have to offend you." Facing his enemy, Zhang Yan, his attitude became serious again, and his mouth began to chant the Tao voice again. Zhang Yan noticed that the voice this person was chanting this time was different from the Tao voice he used to expel the spirit of creation. It felt even more grand and deep, and he immediately understood that this person's Tao voice could be different for different people. So, the method of dispelling it would probably be different as well. Perhaps the only result here was the same, and that was to send him into eternal silence. It wasn't difficult for him to break through this technique, and he just had to decipher it again. However, he wasn't interested in this at all. Because so long as the Tao voice hadn't been chanted to the end, then it wouldn't pose any threat to him. Before that, he just had to defeat his opponent, so he didn't have to pay any attention to it at all. With a thought, a sword light suddenly floated and slashed towards Hongdu. After he sacrificially refined the Qinghong sword pill, it had already obtained the transformation of being and non-being. In other words, it could appear from being to non-being. If there was no obstruction, it could appear on the opponent in an instant with a thought, and the entire process could be ignored. It was just that Dada was protected by the Weili, so it was impossible for it to jump to the most vital part. But this also depended on the strength of the Weili on both sides. If it were Xiang Ju and the rest, the sword light might reach them in an instant, but if it were Feng Du, the resistance would be much greater. Hongdu saw the sword light that swept over, and instantly felt a serious threat. He understood that if he was hit, he would definitely lose a part of his Tao. So he stood still, but an apparition that looked exactly like him walked out from his body, and took the initiative to face the sword light. The sword light slashed across the apparition, and the apparition immediately shattered, along with the sword light. However, there was more than one sword light. Then, there were more sword lights that slashed over, and outside his body, there were apparitions that walked out continuously. For a moment, it was as if there were countless Fengdu. Under the frequent falling sword light, they constantly dissipated and constantly reappeared. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. Just now, Hongdu was fighting with Xiang Ju and the rest, and in addition to his battle with the apparition of the spirit of creation, he had already seen this kind of supernatural power twice. It was just that this method was not like the Tao voice and the treasure light released by the spirit of creation. His own Weili had not directly collided with it, so he had not calculated it before. But now that he was facing it, there was naturally a way to break it. After a brief calculation, the Xian Qi in his body surged, and suddenly turned into a big hand, which reached for Hongdu. Fengdu used the same trick again, and released another apparition that rushed up. Under the grasp of the Xian Qi hand, the apparition shattered like a bubble. However, the Xian Qi hand that should have been shattered together with the apparition was still there, and there was no sign of it being dissolved. Instead, it continued to press down on him. Fengdu's expression froze. This situation clearly meant that Zhang Yan had only touched the apparition once, and in a short period of time, he had solved the Tao within it. He calculated once more, and then released another phantom. This time, it collided with the profound energy hand and successfully eliminated it at the same time. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Hongdu was indeed somewhat capable. Although the method he used seemed to be exactly the same as before, in fact, the Tao within it had undergone some very ingenious changes. Of course, the fundamental Tao of a person would not change. Only the external appearance would change. If such an enemy wanted to break his method, he would have to resolve and calculate it every time. This was much more brilliant than the rigid methods of Xiangju and the others. In fact, if Xiangjue and the others were at full power, they might have been able to do this. However, they were at a disadvantage in that their return was not as complete as Hongdu's. The difference was not just a little bit, but a difference in level. Zhang Yan thought for a moment. Although they had only exchanged 2 blows, through his previous observation and what he had now, he had more or less figured out the strengths and weaknesses of Hongdu's Tao. Hongdu was obviously not afraid of strong attacks, but he did not have much of a way to trap and block it. The incarnation of the spirit of creation had used this kind of magical power on him several times, but he had not been able to break it in time. Although this was not a problem in the eyes of others of the same generation, in his opinion, it was an extremely obvious shortcoming. With a turn of his mind, the 5-colored brilliance behind him turned and shrouded Fengdu. Fengdu's expression changed. He only felt that there was infinite Tao in the 5-colored brilliance, and he could not solve it in a short period of time. Therefore, he released apparitions again and again, but the 5-colored brilliance did not stop rotating. It appeared and disappeared as it went. The apparitions were thrown into it, but they could not stir up any waves. He suddenly realized that Zhang Yan's method was brilliant, and he could not dodge it at all. However, he could also judge that this should be a trapping method, so he took out a formula and guarded his mind. At this moment, when the 5-colored brilliance fell, in just a moment, there was no trace of him in the silence. Chapter 2256. As soon as Zhang Yan retrieved Hongdu, the 5-colored radiance disappeared as well. Hongdu was now trapped in his Tao. However, being trapped in it did not mean that one was defenseless. If the latter's power was higher than his, it was possible for him to force his way out with some effort. However, Hongdu was obviously not at such a level. Unless he could decipher the Taoist law in it, he could not get out. It was just that the 5-elemental true light was constantly rotating, and the Tao technique was also changing endlessly. Even before you could decipher it, the Tao technique that you saw would change into another form, and you would have to deduce it from the beginning. Therefore, it was not easy to get out. The most amazing thing about this place was that as the trapped person continued to decipher and deduce, his or her Tao art would gradually be exposed, and it would be known to Zhang Yan. Moreover, the deeper his understanding was, the more targeted changes there would be, and the more difficult it would be for the trapped person to decipher. Therefore, once one was trapped in the 5-colored radiance, if one did not get out as soon as possible, the chances of getting out would become smaller. When the trapped person tried his best and still could not get out, he would be at the mercy of Zhang Yan. Of course, it was not like he did not have any burden here. He had to share a part of the Weili to suppress it. Fortunately, with the suppression of the mighty force, when the person trapped here was completely cut off from all connections, he only needed to push them gently to send them into eternal silence. Whether Hongdu could get out or not, it was hard for him to judge. Therefore, he put it aside for now and turned to look at Ji Zhuang and the others. Ji Zhuang and the others were entangled by the shadow. They wanted to break free as soon as possible, but when they saw Zhang Yan make his move, they all slowed down. They did not want to get involved in the battle between the two. When they saw Hong Do being taken away by the five-colored radiance, they were all shocked. However, they could also tell that Hong Do had not been banished into eternal silence. Otherwise, the Weili that trapped them would have disappeared as well. It would not have remained in their bodies. However, this time, Zhang Yan only needed a few moves to subdue Hong, and it seemed that he had not used his full strength. This made them very fearful. After observing for a while, Zhang Yan realized that the supernatural power that Hong Du used to trap Ji Zhuang and the others looked like an illusion, but it was different from what Do Zhan had used. It was a different method, but it still relied on the changes of Tao. Therefore, this was not a difficult task for him. With a slight deduction, he knew how to break it. Next, he waved his sleeve and moved the mighty power that trapped Xiangjue and the others away. Xiangju and the others felt a wave of relief wash over them. They looked at each other. Ji Zhuang was the first to step forward. He cupped his fists and said, "Fellow Taoist, thank you for helping us escape. May I ask?" He asked tentatively, "Where did fellow Taoist Fengdu go?" Zhang Yan said indifferently, "I'm just sending him to a place for the time being. If he makes up his mind and promises not to overturn everything, I'll let him go." Ji Zhuang and the other three looked at each other and said, "In our opinion, Hong Du will not change his mind so easily." Zhang Yan said, "If he doesn't change his mind, I'll deal with him." Ji Zhuang was finally relieved. He said, "Then I'll leave it to you, fellow Taoist." Heng Wu said, "Fellow Taoist Shenyuan, how should we deal with the Weili spirits of creation that have wandered into the various worlds? If we can deal with this matter, I believe fellow Taoist Fengdu will not be so fixated on this matter." There were still less than half of the Weili left. If they were not eliminated, when the spirits of creation returned, they would only become more powerful. Especially with the birth and destruction of the present world, the Weili that had sunk into it had long become one with the various worlds. They also knew that Hong Du's method of destroying the various worlds was the simplest and most effective method. No matter how deep the Weili hid, it would be useless. But the consequences were too great, so they would not consider it. Zhang Yan said, "What do you think about this?" Xiangju said, "I have an idea. I wonder if it will work?" Zhang Yan said, "Go ahead." Xiangju considered his words before saying, "Fellow Taoists and I have used the bodies of the spirit of creation to enter the world. Fellow Taoists should know about this. From this, we can see that when the mighty power of the spirit of creation is without an owner, it will naturally pursue its original Tao." He looked at the three of them, then at Zhang Yan and said, "We can establish a great world. This world can connect all the realms and worlds, and we can put all the spirits of creation that we can see into it. They can cultivate and spread their Tao. This way, they will definitely be able to draw the Weili here. When the time is right, we can capture them in one fell swoop." Wei Ming thought for a while and said, "With just a few spirits of creation, how many Weili can we draw?" Xiangju said, "Don't we still have the incarnation of the Weili that we suppressed? Since we can use this person to bring the Weili spirits of creation into the world, we can also capture the Weili from the various worlds." Heng Wu thought for a while and nodded. "In that case, this method is indeed feasible." Ji Zhuang looked at Zhang Yan and said, "Now let's see what fellow Taoist Xianyuan has to say." Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He knew that Ji Zhuang and the others had not forgotten about the idea of sharing the land of creation. This united day and connecting all worlds might be to solve the problem of the Weili spirits of creation, but if they followed this method, they would also open the door to the land of creation. He would not give them the chance to do so. He said indifferently, "This method is useful, but I will find a way to remove the mighty power of the creation spirit from Bu Su Tian and the land of creation. There is no need to contact the first bureau." Xiangju knew that things would not be so easy, but he was just testing the waters. Seeing that this method did not work, he brought up another matter. "Fellow Taoist Shenyuan, in order to stop the spirit of creation, we have done our best. Just now, in order to stop Fengdu from overturning the various worlds, we have also done our best. This should prove that we are not related to the spirit of creation, right? Regardless of whether it was to find the missing path or to establish a great world, they had to find the place where the essence of creation was located here. However, they were worried that Zhang Yan would use the excuse that they might be the spirit of creation and take it away. If they could prove themselves now, then they would not have to worry about this matter in the future. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This actually cannot prove anything. Let me ask you, when fellow Taoist Fengdu was fighting with the spirit of creation, if one of you suddenly interfered, what could you have done?" Later on, stopping fellow Taoist Fengdu was also beneficial to the spirit of creation, so this cannot prove anything. However, what you said is somewhat reasonable. A big domain does indeed need a land of creation to maintain, but this matter is not urgent. We can talk about it later. Wei Ming seemed to want to say something, but Xiang Ju said, "Fellow Taoist, don't be in a hurry. Since this Taoist Shenyuan cares about the various worlds, then he will not let the spirit of creation continue to be infected by the Weili. There is no harm in waiting." After saying this, Zhang Yan turned and left. Because Fengdu had not been completely suppressed, he did not return to Bu Su Tian for the time being. Instead, he landed in the fixed world that he had established. After this battle, Bu Su Tian, the Mirror Lake, and the other places of creation had been contaminated with the mighty power of the spirit of creation. Most of it had been erased by him, but there was still a lot that could not be cleaned up and could be handed over to his subordinates. Thus, he immediately sent down a decree. After doing this, he turned his gaze to the 5 elements' true light. At this moment, Fengdu found himself in a vast domain. What he saw in front of him was a sea of 5-colored light, which was constantly circulating and evolving into infinite changes. Every single time he deduced, he would have no choice but to give up before he truly obtained an outcome. This was because the Tao art he deduced had already changed. He discerned that Zhang Yan possessed the same ability to internally determine and externally change just like him, and it wasn't just that, Zhang Yan was even more brilliant than him. After trying many times, he found that his chances of getting out were very slim, and his connection with the various worlds had begun to weaken. If he persisted, even if Zhang Yan did not continue to exert pressure on him, he might still fall into eternal silence. After determining his possible ending, he did not hesitate and immediately activated his divine will, trying to communicate with Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan sensed some movement in the divine will, smiled slightly, and then turned inexplicably. At this moment, Taoist Fengdu was already standing there. When he saw Zhang Yan appear, he cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Shenyuan, will you let me out if I promise to give up overturning the various worlds?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "I have no enmity with you, fellow Taoist. I have already explained the reason why I stopped you. As long as fellow Taoist is willing to give up this thought, I can let you out." Fengdu was very straightforward. "Since I have lost to fellow Taoist, I am willing to follow fellow Taoist's will. If fellow Taoist lets me go, I will no longer cling to this thought." Others might think that people like Fengdu would definitely go all the way and refuse to admit defeat no matter what. In fact, this was not the case. Hong Do would not reason with those who were weaker than him. However, if he met someone who was stronger than him, or even someone who could suppress him, then he would naturally feel that the person's words were more reasonable. Zhang Yan said, "Before that, there is one more thing." Fengdu said, "Fellow Taoist, please speak." Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, Creation Pauline, can I have a look at it?" Fengdu did not even ask the reason behind it. He directly waved his hand and summoned Creation Pauline, and casually sent it over. Zhang Yan took Creation Pauline, plucked a lotus petal from it, and returned it to Fengdu. Although Fengdu was a little puzzled, he did not ask the purpose of this and only said, "May I go out?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He was not afraid that Fengdu would go back on his words. Although Fengdu might be more cautious next time after being trapped by the 5 elements true light, Zhang Yan could still take him down even if he did not use this method. Moreover, Fengdu's existence in this world was far better than banishing him into eternal silence. In order to fight against the true body of the spirit of creation, he still needed Fengdu's strength. Thus, with a thought, the surrounding 5-colored light suddenly collapsed, and Fengdu was sent out. Chapter 2257. After Zhang Yan retracted the 5 elements true light, he came out of the time freeze. Fengdu was outside and had not left yet. He sensed that Zhang Yan let him go so easily, so he asked, "Do you have anything else to say?" Zhang Yan said, "I do have something to discuss with fellow Taoist. Everyone needs to be protected, but the mighty force of the spirit of creation needs to be removed. Fellow Taoist Xiangju believes that we can work together to create a large domain that connects all worlds. Then, we can throw the incarnation of the spirit of creation that we captured into this domain. This way, we can find a way to attract those mighty forces." Fengdu did not care about the process, so he asked, "Do you think it's feasible?" His attitude was very straightforward. "Since you are strong, you have the final say." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "We can give it a try, but one of the 4 may be the creation spirit's incarnation, so it's not appropriate to let him handle this matter. But if Fengdu is in charge, then we can be more at ease." Before the mighty power of the spirit of creation arrived, he had actually thought about the possibility that Hongdu might be the body that was being borrowed. Hence, he was prepared to step forward and suppress the situation should there be any changes. But it turned out that Fengdu was not the incarnation, otherwise he would not have to fight against the creation spirit to this extent. Although Xiangjue and the others also participated in the battle, their influence and role were too small, so it was hard to get rid of the suspicion on them. Fengdu said, "I agree to this." Zhang Yan said, "Then I will have to trouble you." Fengdu cupped his hands and left the place. With just a shift, he came near Xiangjue and the others. Xiangjue and the others were shocked to see him suddenly appear, and then they were puzzled. Why did he come out again? Could it be that Taoist Shenyuan failed to suppress him, so he came out again? However, they quickly came back to their senses. The truth shouldn't be like this. From the very beginning, Fengdu's objective was to destroy all beings and kill the creation spirit Weili along with it. Now no one could stop him. However, he didn't do such a thing. It seemed like he had given up on this idea. They breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that Taoist Xianyuan had suppressed him. If that was the case, there was no need to fight him. Hong Do glanced at the 4 of them and said, "I heard that you all want to build a region of creation to attract the spirits of creation to the Weili?" Xiangju looked at the others and said, "That's right, that's exactly what we plan to do. Does fellow Fengdu have any opinions?" Hong Do was a little impatient and said, "I have no objections. Since you have already decided, then hurry up and get started." In Buxa Heaven, this time, the creation spirit Weili had invaded the world. It naturally had a deep impact on the bodies of the creation spirit that had descended into the world. However, most of these people were subdued by Yan Jiao, or simply like Dan Yi and Meng Hu followed their own Tao as the righteous path, so the impact wasn't great. But this time, the difference was that these Weili had formed Dharma carvings of creation in various parts of the world. This could be seen by living beings in the world, and they could learn Tao from it. Although this was not as good as the Dharma carvings of creation prepared by the creation spirit, and many parts of it were scattered, but because everyone could see it, it spread far faster than before. Yan Jiao was the first to discover this. This time, it wasn't only because of Zhang Yan's message, but also because Yan Jiao had branches all over the heavens and worlds, and the realm gate that could be used at any time. This allowed Yan Jiao to be the first to discover any unusual movements in the world. Gao Chengtu reacted quickly. After hearing about this, he immediately ordered people to deal with these Dharma carvings. Those that could be destroyed were destroyed, and those that could not be destroyed were sealed. However, because there were too many of these Dharma carvings, it was difficult to clean them up one by one. Therefore, even though Yan Jiao acted quickly, there were still many contents on the Dharma carvings that leaked out. Gao Chengtu had no choice but to gather the elders to discuss this matter. An elder suggested, "Leader, we can't take care of everything. We can only take care of those important places first. As for the rest of the world, we can only deal with them as we see them." Gao Chengtu deeply agreed and said, "That's right. Places like Kunsher continent need to be extra careful. We can't let the creation spirit Dao Dharma carvings invade again and repeat the previous scene. In order to stabilize the situation, Gao Gua had yet to return. However, she was only there to calm the hearts of the people. The Kunshe branch still needed a capable branch master to hold the fort for a long time. At this moment, the elders glanced at Elder Yuan intentionally or unintentionally, but the latter sat there without saying a word. After returning to the main altar, Elder Yuan was stripped of all his power and responsibilities. This was a disguised punishment. In the future, apart from protecting the sect, there was almost nothing else for him to do. Tang Yu thought for a while and said, "Teacher, I have a candidate here. Altar Master He, who was originally in Qingyang branch, can take on this position." Immediately, an elder objected, "Altar Master He has only reached the level of mortal metamorphosis in the past few years. Perhaps he's more than enough to go to other branch altars, but I'm afraid his cultivation is insufficient to take on the position of Kunshe branch altar's altar master." Tang Yu disagreed and said, "There's still senior brother Gao there now. He's enough to take control of the situation. Currently, there are many conflicts between our Yen Jiao and the other sections. If we're not careful, we'll become enemies. Altar Master He is a modest person and is good at mediating relationships between different parties. He's a very suitable candidate." Gao Chengtu thought for a while. Currently, the main objective was to curb the spread of the spirit of creation Dao technique. At this time, they really couldn't deepen the conflict with the other sections. He also had an impression of this He Xianren. Not only did he manage the branch altars under his rule in an orderly manner, but he also rarely got along with the other sects without any discord. This person might not be the most capable candidate, but it was suitable to put him in this position. Thus, he said, "We'll do as Tang Yu says." Once he spoke, everyone no longer objected. They all agreed in unison. Not long after, an edict was sent out from the main altar. Only half a day later, He Xianren received a transfer order. Because the main altar was urging him to take up the post, he didn't dare to be negligent. After packing up a little, he set off for the Kunshe continent. Elder He, who came to deliver the edict, specially reminded, this time it's to eliminate the conflict with the other sections. In addition, it's to exterminate the spirit of creation Dao technique. As long as these two matters are accomplished, we'll be able to account to the sect master. He Xianren said, "May I ask Elder He, who is the chief protector of the Kunshe continent subaltar, and what kind of person is he?" This time, the edict came without any warning. In the past, due to the rules of the sect, he didn't have any channels to understand the other subalters, so he could be said to know nothing about the situation in the Kunshe continent. And in every subaltar, under the altar master, naturally, the chief protector was the most important. If there was a battle, the altar master rarely appeared, and usually the chief protector would be the one to settle it. Therefore, this person was very important. If this person didn't get along with him, then no matter how great his ability was, it would be difficult for him to display it. Elder He Daoren said, "The chief protector's name is Meng Hu. He wasn't transferred from anywhere else. He was transferred from the mysterious mirror subaltar when the Kunshe continent subaltar was just established. After Chief Protector Duan left, this Chief Protector Meng took over. A few days ago, when the subaltar was in danger, it was mostly because of him that he was promoted to Chief Protector." He Xianren thought about it and asked a few more questions. In fact, Elder He didn't know much about Meng Hu, but he was familiar with Duan Cheng. The latter respected Meng Hu very much, so he roughly explained according to Duan Cheng's meaning. Right now, the Kunshe subaltar couldn't afford to be tossed around. In order not to cause conflict between He Xianren and Meng Hu from the beginning, he added some of his own opinions and slightly raised Meng Hu's status. He didn't think it was too much. Duan Cheng was a very honest person, and the things he said were usually very trustworthy. After listening, He Xianren couldn't help but nod. Through the description, he had a rough impression of Meng Hu in his mind. He was talented, had a strong background, and was outstanding in ability. He was usually a man of few words, didn't strive for credit, and didn't stand out. He relied on his own merits to get to the position of Chief Protector. In short, he was a person who strictly abided by the rules, quietly contributed and could be relied on at critical moments. He was very gratified and at the same time felt a lot more relaxed. If there was such a fellow sect member to support each other, it wouldn't be difficult to stabilize the situation in the Kunsher continent. The two of them quickly crossed the border. After Elder he sent him to the Kunsher continent subaltar. He finished his duty and left. After he Xianren arrived, the first thing he did was to pay a visit to Gaogua. Then he summoned his subordinates for a meeting. However, to his regret, Meng Hu had gone out to suppress the outside world. Now that the Taoist techniques and Dharma carvings had appeared one after another, he wouldn't be able to rush back in a short time. Thinking that they still had a long time to spend together in the future, he didn't ask any more questions. After a few days, he more or less understood the specific situation of the subaltar. Generally speaking, the matters of the Kunsher subaltar weren't complicated. The relationship between the subaltar and the sects could only be said to be easing, but it couldn't be said to be very good. However, he believed that as long as there was an external enemy, the spirit of creation, and the sect Yen was always at the front, the sects wouldn't turn hostile. However, there would definitely be a pull behind the scenes. Now, the first thing to deal with was the Taoist techniques of the spirit of creation that were circulating outside. Because those Dharma carvings appeared out of thin air, it was very difficult to eliminate them from the root. Since he couldn't solve it here, he could only think of a solution from the cultivators. He pondered for a long time and summoned all the attendants and Dharma protectors who were still in the subaltar. He issued the first order after becoming the subaltar master, saying, "Pass down my order, close the subaltar's realm gate. Without my personal order and the sect's talisman, no one is allowed to pass through." The realm gate was related to the communication with the main altar, as well as the travel between the sections. In reality, at this point in time, the opening and closing of the realm gate was no longer a matter of the sect Yen alone. This order seemed to be slightly out of line, but he Xianren just now took office. At this time, no one dared to stand out and dissuade him. Therefore, the matter was passed smoothly. At this moment, an attendant suddenly came to report, saying, "Altar Master, Protector Meng has returned." He Xianren revealed a trace of a smile and said cheerfully, "Very good. I happen to have a lot of things to discuss with Protector Meng." He had been looking forward to this meeting. At this moment he didn't put on the airs of an altar master and waited in the inner hall. Instead, he led everyone out to welcome him. Chapter 2258. As soon as Meng Hu returned to the branch altar, he saw a large group of people rushing out aggressively. His first reaction was, could it be that someone is jealous of me and wants to harm me? He started to reflect on himself. Was he too active recently, causing his fellow disciples to lose the opportunity to contribute? He didn't want that to happen. He was simply too outstanding. He could make contributions just by walking a few rounds. How could he be blamed for this? He Xianren saw a young cultivator walking over from afar. Based on his previous understanding, he knew this was Meng Hu. He secretly observed him and found that this person had a serious expression and steady steps. There was even a hint of worry between his brows. He nodded subconsciously. He had found out beforehand that no matter where Meng Hu went this time, he did everything perfectly without any oversight. When Elder Yuan and Duan Cheng both left, he was the one who took care of all the external affairs. It could be said that he had done a great service for Meng Hu. However, when he returned, he didn't show any signs of wanting to take credit. It seemed like he was still worried about the branch altar. This was very consistent with the image he imagined. He took the initiative to walk forward, cupped his hands, and said, "Protector Meng, greetings." Meng Hu didn't know him, but there were too many people he didn't know. He made a sound and was about to reply. There was a deacon Taoist priest with the surname Huang standing beside He Xianren. He was very familiar with Meng Hu. Before Elder Yuan left, he had specially reminded him to think of a way to keep an eye on Meng Hu. If he could persuade Meng Hu, he would try his best to not make any mistakes. He was very afraid that something would happen and he couldn't complete Elder Yuan's task. He hurriedly said, "Guardian Meng, this is altar leader He. He is the new altar leader sent by the main altar." Meng Hu was well disciplined by Zhang Quan in terms of etiquette. He instinctively raised his hand and greeted, "Altar leader He, greetings." He Shenren saw that he was neither servile nor overbearing and was even more satisfied. After all, no altar leader liked their guardian to be at odds with them. In fact, in other areas, there were many guardian who had conflicts with the altar leader. Because logically, only the altar leader had the right to use the guardian. If he completely ignored the altar leader would have no choice but to report it to the altar leader and cause both sides to suffer. One had to know that the main situation in the Kunsher continent was in the outside world, so if the two of them did not get along well, then he could forget about being an altar lord. He smiled and said, "Before I came here, I've heard of Protector Meng's reputation. Now that I've met you, you really do live up to your reputation. I hope that you and I can work together in the future and manage the Kun beginning branch well." When Meng Hu heard this, he felt that these people did not seem to be here to cause trouble for him. He made a sound of acknowledgement and was about to say something when Deacon Huang hastily interrupted, "Guardian Meng, altar leader, he knows that you will be returning soon, so he has specially taken care of you. The banquet that was originally meant to congratulate altar leader on his appointment will be held after your return." The smile on He Xuanren's face did not change, but he had some complaints about Deacon Huang in his heart. Although Deacon Huang spoke appropriately and said what he wanted to say, he could not always bully Guardian Meng because he was an honest man. Deacon Huang, on the other hand, breathed a sigh of relief. Seeing that everything was fine in front of the door, he said, "Altar leader, Guardian Meng has been working hard outside for a long time, and just now, he must be tired. Why don't you rest for 2 days and then hold a banquet to welcome Guardian Meng?" He Shenren smiled and said, "It seems that I'm being a little unreasonable. Guardian Meng, in the future when we work together, I'll have to rely on you to take care of me." Meng Hu's expression became solemn and he said, "I will." Although He Shenren had given him such a heavy responsibility right from the start, he could understand. He was an outstanding person, so if he did not hand it over to him, who else could he hand it over to? For the overall situation of the branch altar, it seemed that he could only put in a little more effort. He Shenren smiled and said, "Then I won't disturb Guardian Meng any longer. If there's anything, let's talk about it later." Deacon Huang's nervousness faded a little. The two of them seemed to be getting along well when they first met, and at least nothing unexpected happened. He could only hope that nothing unforeseen would happen in the future. 2 days later, He Shenren held a banquet in the branch altar. Not only did he invite Meng Hu, but he also summoned all the guardians and deacons in the branch altar. During the banquet, He Shenren and Meng Hu did not converse much. Deacon Huang watched from below, and he was always unusually nervous. Every time, he would say something to fill in the gaps. He Shenren also noticed something, but he remained calm and collected. After the banquet ended, he tried to persuade Meng Hu to stay. He said, "Guardian Meng and I hit it off at first sight, and it just so happens that there are some mundane matters in the branch altar that I would like to consult Guardian Meng on. Why don't you stay and have a few more drinks?" Deacon Huang hurriedly said, "Altar Master, Guardian Meng has never cared about these things. He only cares about external fights and expeditions." He Shenren merely glanced at him indifferently. Immediately, Deacon Huang did not dare to utter another word. He retreated with a bitter face. He Shenren invited Meng Hu to the inner residence and ordered people to serve 2 cups of fragrant tea. He said, "This is the spiritual tea that I brought from the Chunyang branch altar. It has a different flavor compared to the one here in the Kunshin branch altar. Guardian Meng, you don't have to taste it." Meng Hu took a sip and put it down. He said in disdain, "It's not salty at all." He Shenren was startled. He laughed and said, "Guardian Meng has a unique taste." He thought to himself that this Guardian Meng was a straightforward person who said whatever was on his mind. It was good that he was easier to get along with than someone with complicated thoughts. As this thought crossed his mind, he immediately instructed the servants, "Come, bring Guardian Meng's favorite spiritual tea." After the teacup was changed, He Shenren said, "Guardian Meng, I have checked the number of creation spirits' dharma carvings that you have eliminated during your trip. There are a total of 53 places, and more than half of them are located in the depths of the wasteland that no one has ever been to before. Guardian Meng has indeed made a great contribution this time. Meng Hu did not think that this was a big deal. He just sat there and enjoyed his tea. In He Xuanren's eyes, this was a display of indifference. He said, "I was the altar master of another branch altar. There has never been a creation spirit causing trouble there, and I have never come into contact with a creation spirit's dharma. Guardian Meng has fought with this kind of person a few times, so I presume you have a very good understanding of this person?" The most important problem he had to solve this time was how to resolve the invasion of the creation spirit's dharma. Although he did not understand the knack behind it, he only needed to use it on the right person. Meng Hu raised his head and puffed out his chest. Of course. If it was not for Zhang Chan repeatedly reminding him not to let the fellow Taoists see the heart realm, he would have dragged He Xianren into the heart realm with just a thought and let him try to understand what a creation spirit was. He Xianren immediately asked many questions, and Meng Hu answered them one by one. He was a creation spirit's incarnation, so his words were exceptionally insightful. Moreover, when it came to matters related to Dharma, he did as he should. Any mistake in his words could deviate from his original meaning, so the two of them had a pleasant conversation. One asked what he wanted to know, and the other obtained the satisfaction of solving someone's doubts. He Xianren personally sent Meng Hu to the door and said, "Guardian Meng, I'll leave the altar's matters to you." Meng Hu cupped his hands and left. He Xianren glanced at Attendant Huang standing in the corner. He called out, "Attendant Huang, come over here." Attendant Huang came over anxiously and bowed. "Greetings, Altar Master." He had been waiting outside the entire time, afraid that the two of them would have some conflict. Seeing the two of them come out and talk happily without any accidents, he was really puzzled. He Xianren said, "I saw that you repeatedly interrupted Guardian Meng previously, and later tried to dissuade me from meeting Guardian Meng alone. I'm very curious, why did you do that?" Attendant Huang immediately found it hard to reply and said, "This?" He Xianren smiled and said, "Are you afraid that Guardian Meng will speak too straightforwardly and offend me? And cause discord between the two of us?" Attendant Huang thought to himself, "I'm not afraid of him offending you, I'm afraid you won't be able to bear it." But he couldn't say that, so he could only vaguely agree and lowered his head. "I can't hide it from Altar Master." He Xianren smiled again, and then his expression turned serious. He said sternly, "You underestimate me too much. I've always been a broad-minded person. Even if Guardian Meng was a bit more straightforward and spoke without restraint, I would still be able to tolerate him. I wouldn't have any conflict with him." In the mountain and sea realm, Hong Yu had unknowingly stayed in the Guangyuan sect for more than a year. After agreeing to Yang Miaosheng's various requests to study talisman techniques, he also obtained the opportunity to deeply understand the various talisman techniques of the Guangyuan sect. Of course, he couldn't see the key points. However, he didn't need that. He just wanted to understand Shun Chang's path from these techniques. No matter how profound Shun Chang's Taoist techniques were, they still had a foundation from which all future Taoist techniques would be derived. But the results were as he expected. Although the Guangyuan sect's techniques and Shun Chang's had some similarities, Shun Chang's techniques were unique to himself. This was similar to the Primal Yang sect's techniques that he cultivated. On the surface, it still looked like the Primal Yang sect's path, but in reality, it had long since surpassed the original rules. These days he was still communicating with the elders of the Shaoqing and Qinsong sects, trying to find a way to restore himself to his peak. The most reliable method here was to use his divine will to derive the scene of that day, and then defeat Shun Chang's divine will illumination. No matter what method he used, even magical treasures would work. But when he tried it, it didn't have much effect. Every time, it would be broken in one move. There was another method, and that was to temporarily seal this part of his memories. That way, it wouldn't interfere with his cultivation of Taoist techniques. When he comprehended something, he could come back and observe, and perhaps he would be able to resolve it. He thought about it deeply, but didn't do that. That way, he could avoid the problem, but he couldn't resolve the flaw in his state of mind, which would always be a hidden danger. Another month later, he bid farewell to Yang Miaosheng. The latter tried to persuade him to stay, but he wasn't moved. He could also see that this person was very obsessed with talisman techniques, and could not wait for him to stay here to display his qi for her to study. He thought that with Yang Miaosheng's talent, if he was given a few thousand years, she might really be able to resolve it. However, he wasn't willing to wait for so long, and would rather find a solution himself. On the second day after he bid farewell, he went down the mountain with Ran Xiushu's clone. Then, according to their original plan, they headed towards the Clear Feather sect in the Wing Sky continent. The two of them used the transfer spell altar, and in just a few days, they arrived in front of the Phoenix Cry Gorge where the Clear Feather sect's mountain gate was. Chapter 2259. Amidst the silence, Xiangju and the others worked together and formed the world that connected all worlds. In order to make this place permanent, it was attached to the 3 places of fortune below the Weiming Plain. After this was done, the 4 of them used the Weili and saw the doors of the other worlds open and connect to this place. However, this was the ordinary world that they could see at the moment. The places of creation hidden in the all things could not be connected. However, at this moment, everyone could faintly see the existence of some places of creation. They were shocked, but when they tried to find them, there was no trace of them. Xiangju and the others looked at each other. They didn't expect that once this world was formed, there would be such a harvest. It was unexpected. Although those places of fortune had disappeared, if he continued to circulate his cultivation technique, he might be able to use this world to find them. Xiangju sighed and said, "What a pity. The places of fortune that we used to connect were too ordinary, and the power gathered was not enough. If we could use Bu Su Tian, we might be able to manifest all the places of fortune." The 3 of them knew what he meant, but this matter involved Zhang Yan, so they didn't say anything. Hong Du sneered and said, "If you have the ability, you can go and take it yourself. What's the point of sighing here? Are you hoping for someone else to help you?" Xiangju immediately shut his mouth. Wei Ming said, "Once this step is done, we should be able to attract the Weili spirits of creation, right?" The 4 of them nodded and used their techniques to send the suppressed purple-clothed Taoist into the world. Then, they used their own Weili to attract the scattered Weili spirits of creation. This was quickly effective. After being attracted, the Weili spirits of creation were pulled out from the real world. Like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, they were thrown into this world. However, although the purple-robed Taoist was used as a guide, he would not really allow the mighty force to enter his body. Instead, it would help him achieve success. Hence, in the end, Hong Du chanted the Tao voice and chased the force into eternal silence. Ji Zhuang watched for a long time and sighed. Hung Wu was curious and transmitted a message. "Why are you sighing, Taoist friend?" Ji Zhuang said in a low voice, "Just now, we know that there are many changes that we don't know. This method of summoning is also unprecedented. I don't know if it will cause unpredictable changes." Hung Wu thought for a while and agreed. Taoist friend's worry is not unreasonable. But with Taoist Fengdu here, even if he notices something strange, he will stop it. After a pause, he continued, "Our power is not complete yet, so we can only rely on fellow Taoist Fengdu and Bu Shutian." Mountain and Sea Realm, in front of Phoenix Cry Gorge, the sky was clear, the water was clear, and the sky was clear. Hong Yu and Ran Xiushu's clones came out from the white jade altar and saw the scenery below. It was a unique scene. Hong Yu and Ran Xiushu's doppelgangers came out from the white jade altar and looked down at the scenery below. It was a unique scene compared to what he had seen before. Ran Xiushu had never been here before. She saw the 2 mountains facing each other, slanting into the sky like the wings of a phoenix. The wind swept past and there was a clear whistling sound. She pointed and said, "I think this mountain is where the Phoenix Cry Gorge got its name from." Hong Yu nodded. He was different from the others. He liked to look at the landscape and the veins of the earth qi. The veins here were smooth, flowing like pearls and jade. It was pleasing and refreshing. He said, "The owner of this place is an expert in formations." Ran Xiushu smiled. "I forgot that Taoist friend has the sword plate technique. which can also change sword formations. You must be an expert in this field. Hong Yu said, I can't say I'm an expert. In a battle, the use of formations is average. He suddenly thought of Shen Chang's move and shook his head. As long as one didn't cultivate their Dao to the same realm, one couldn't win, no matter what technique they used. At this moment, there was a commotion on the altar. Two mortal metamorphosis cultivators appeared at the same time and deliberately revealed themselves. The altar guards became nervous. The manager came forward and bowed, asking carefully, This is the territory of Clear Feather Sect. May I know where you are from and what business do you have here? Is there anything my sect can help you with? Ran Xiushu immediately revealed his identity and said that he was here to visit Clear Feather Sect's sect master, Tao Zhenhong. When the manager heard that the two in front of him were really here to visit his patriarch, he immediately relaxed. His expression became solemn as he said, The two of you, please go to the pavilion in front and sit for a moment. I will go and report to the patriarch right away. Unlike other sects, Tao Zhenhong was not only the sect master of Clear Feather Sect, but he was also the sect master. Also, unlike other sects that were established in the Mountain Sea sect, Clear Feather Sect had been established long before the 3 calamities of the 9 continents. Now that it was a large sect in the Mountain Sea sect, it was definitely not someone ordinary cultivators could compare to. Hong Yu was also a large sect, so he knew very well that people who could establish a sect from nothing in the 9 continents were not simple characters. Not long after, a guest elder came and invited the two of them to take a flying boat to Clear Feather Sect's mountain gate. The flying boat traveled along the mountain ridge toward Phoenix Cry Gorge. Along the way, the two of them saw that the surrounding vegetation was strong, beasts were everywhere, and birds and cranes flocked together. Everywhere they passed, there was vitality. At this moment, they suddenly heard the roars of dragons and saw the faint shadows of flood dragons circling above the open sea. Sometimes, they went out of the sea and into the water, and sometimes, they traveled through the clouds. It was a rather spectacular sight. At this moment, Hong Yu asked, Are those flood dragons also reared by your esteemed sect? The guest elder respectfully replied, Back then, when the sects divided the territories, our Clear Feather Sect was assigned to the Wing Sky continent. However, this isn't the only place. Beyond this continent, the area that extends for several tens of thousands of miles out into the sea is the territory of our sect. As long as it's a race in the water, they are all under the control of our Clear Feather Sect. The flying boat quickly approached the palace in the sky. On the Rainbow Bridge, there were many disciples of Clear Feather Sect coming and going. Different from other sects, everyone here had spiritual beasts as their companions. Occasionally, there would be 2 people traveling together, and one of them would most likely be one of these different races. Hong Yu noticed that other than those spiritual beasts, there were many different kinds of dragon demons. He had seen such different races before, and it was rumored that they were created by the sect master of Clear Feather Sect, Tao Zhenhong. When the guest elder saw that he was paying attention to those dragon demons, he smiled and said, These dragon demons are only used to make up for the lack of battle ability of the younger generation. However, if the Supreme Truth is interested, we can create a suitable dragon demon according to the Supreme Truth's intent. Hong Yu didn't know about this, so he asked, You can do that? The guest elder Daoran said, There's a living being in our sect called Dan Long. These dragon demons are all his children. Many of the sect's elders lack the strength to walk, so most of them come to our sect to ask for it. Hong Yu asked a few more questions and found out that this Dan Long was created by Tao Zhenhong. His expression involuntarily turned serious, and he said, Your sect's patriarch is really not simple. Clear Feather Sect and Southflower Sect had quite a bit of history, and there were also similarities in their techniques. However, something like Dan Long completely proved that this sect Master Tao had already opened up another path by himself. The guest elder accompanied them along the way, and after an hour, they landed in front of a large hall. The deacon Taoist from before came forward and said, Patriarch is already waiting respectfully in the main hall. Please come with me. Hong Yu said, Thank you for your trouble. He followed the deacon through a few halls and finally arrived at the top of the main hall. When he looked up, he saw a beautiful and tall Taoist standing there with a yin-yang diagram circling behind her. She held a horsetail whisk in her hand, and she cupped her fist and said, "Fellow Taoists, your presence brings light to my humble dwelling. It's a pleasure to meet you." Hong Yu and Ran Xiushu immediately returned the greeting, expressing their politeness. Tao Zhenhong waved his horsetail whisk and said with a smile, "Both of you are guests, please take a seat and talk." Hong Yu and Ran Xiushu went to the guest seats in the main hall and sat down. Then, spirit fruits and tea were served, and the trays on them were shining brightly and filled with spiritual qi. Tao Zhenhong looked at Ran Xiushu and said, "Fellow Taoist Ran, how should I address this fellow Taoist beside you?" Hong Yu took the initiative and said, "Sect Master Tao, I'm Hong Yu." Tao Zhenhong thought for a while and said in surprise, "Are you Elder Hong Yu of the Primal Yang sect?" Hong Yu said in a deep voice, "Ever since I severed my mortal body, I no longer have anything to do with the Primal Yang sect." Tao Zhenhong nodded slightly. What Hong Yu said was true. Hong Yu was someone who had ascended a long time ago. As long as his own sect did not pursue the matter, logically speaking, he indeed had nothing to do with the Primal Yang sect. However, this was actually just a matter of the cultivator's own thoughts. Even though Hong Yu had severed his mortal body, he was still the sect master of the Clear Feather sect and had never given up on that identity. It was actually a good thing that Hong Yu did not admit it. After all, the Primal Yang sect had already been destroyed. If he insisted on carrying the name of the Primal Yang sect, it would be inevitable for the other sects to be suspicious. Tao Zhenhong talked with the two of them for a while and knew that they were not people who could stand etiquette. He asked directly, "Fellow Taoists, are the two of you here to visit the Tao, or do you have something else to tell me?" Hong Yu then told them the purpose of his visit. Tao Zhenhong pondered for a while and said, "So that's why you are here. However, even though I and that person have been in contact in the past, ever since that person's cultivation has improved, I can only see his arcane energy doppelganger. I don't know what kind of divine abilities and arcane energy are in the upper realm. I'm afraid that you can't ask for much." Hong Yu cupped his hands and said, "The number of memories doesn't matter. Even if it's only a little, it can still fill the gap. I hope that Sect Master Tao can help me." Tao Zhenhong nodded and sent out his memories with his divine decree. Hong Yu received it. At that moment, he felt that a vague figure was about to appear in his divine decree. However, when he wanted to look at it just now, he felt that his qi was messed up and his dharma body was about to collapse. He was shocked and quickly calmed his mind. Only then did he manage to suppress the chaos just now. Tao Zhenhong noticed the change in his body and reminded him, "Fellow Taoist, you should understand that if the mighty figures of the upper realm don't have anything to rely on, you must not recklessly peek at them." Hong Yu nodded. However, he was also doubtful. Even his divine decree, which only had a vague outline, almost collapsed with just a glance. Could the Great Spirit Steel of the Origin Mirage sect really withstand the image of this person? Chapter 2260. When Zhang Yan and the others discovered that the land of creation was faintly discernible, he also saw the changes here. What was different was that his Tao technique was slightly higher, but he remembered a few places. Generally speaking, the movement of the land of creation in the everything could not be deduced because its trajectory completely followed the operation of the Great Tao. Unless one completely understood the changes of the Great Tao, one could not know the whereabouts of these places. However, every Vedanta usually only had one part of the Great Tao. Even he, who had one part of the Tao technique for both qi and strength, was far from enough. However, since there were signs, he could try to find it. If he could find it, it would be the best. If he could not find it, it would not take much effort. Now in the silence, the crack was getting bigger and bigger. Many Whaley were also repeatedly colliding with the robbery power. However, because the previous operation was only half successful, there were still many spirit of creation Whaley scattered in the everything. The problem here had not been solved, so it was obviously not appropriate to summon them again. Therefore, this time, no one deliberately tried to summon them. However, it seemed that the previous summon had attracted many spirit of creation Whaley to come earlier. This time, they were particularly cautious and did not rush out. However, with this retreat, those Vedanta Wali naturally filled in and penetrated into the everything. Therefore, there might be more than 2 Vedanta that came this time. On the other side, in the world created by Xiang Ju and the others, Wei Ming looked at the crack, trying to draw back the last bit of his missing Wali so that he could complete himself. However, he always felt that something was still missing and could not do it. He wanted to add more Wali, but he was afraid that it would cause more unpredictable changes. He could faintly feel that this was definitely related to the shattering of the spirit of creation back then. This was because almost every Vedanta who returned had incomplete memories, including Hong Do. Perhaps only the majority of Vedanta would be able to obtain the answer after they returned. However, at that time, the spirit of creation would probably be extremely close to falling into the hands of all beings. At this time, in the Mirror Lake, due to the invasion of the spirit of creation Wali and the successive appearance of the heavenly Dharma carvings, this place was also deeply affected. Yen Jiao had received the edict in advance and was prepared, but the other sects did not have the ancestral founder to pass on the edict. Very quickly, they tasted the bitterness. Many of their disciples had switched to the spirit of creation Tao technique. It could be said that this method directly gave them the way to reach the Great Way. They only needed to dig into their own bodies. Other than spiritual vigor, pills and precious medicines were not necessary. They did not need to be bound by the sect, so why not? When the De sect, Xing sect, Luo sect, and the other sects noticed this, they understood that this Tao technique would absolutely shake their foundations, so they immediately withdrew their confrontation with the Yen sect and turned their full strength to encircle and annihilate the person that cultivated this Tao technique. In this place, it didn't matter if one was following the Tao of the spirit of creation or purely pursuing one's own path. In a deep valley, both Duan Yi and Priest Shi were deeply worried. Ever since they saw the Tao technique in Meng Hu's realm of heart, to avoid the pursuit of the Luo sect, they hid in the depths of the wasteland to teach their disciples. They did not show themselves easily and were prepared to wait until they achieved great success and had the power to protect themselves before going to other realms to survive. However, they did not expect that not only the Luo sect, but the Yen sect, Xing sect, and De sect were also trying to encircle and annihilate them. Moreover, their attitude was to kill them all. Once they showed themselves, there would be no chance of survival. The Yen sect was slightly better. As long as one was willing to cut off the memory of the spirit of creation Tao technique and swear not to go against the Yen sect, then one could live in the Yen sect's realm. However, it was fine if they did not see this method. Since they already knew the direction of the Great Way, how would they be willing to give it up so easily? Duan Yi thought for a long time and said, "Fellow Taoist, I have been thinking about it. Why don't we go and beg Guardian Meng?" Guardian Meng? Priest Shi asked doubtfully. Although Guardian Meng passed down the Tao technique to us, it is unlikely that he will stand up for us. Moreover, I heard that Guardian Meng was transferred away from the other altars by the Yen sect. Where can we find him now? Duan Ye's eyes were bright and he said, "But Go Han can be found. He has also cultivated under our sect before. We should have some friendship, right? It should not be difficult to ask him to pass a message to Guardian Meng, right?" When Gohan was still a child, he cultivated under their sect. He learned everything in a short time. Feeling that he could not be taught, he allowed Meng Hu to take him away. It was said that he was not taken away by the latter. Until now, he was still in the Jiyang branch and was being nurtured by the Yen sect as the branch's guardian. Priest Shi hesitated, but fellow Taoists should be able to see that Gohan should be the reincarnation of the spirit of creation. If we communicate with him at this time, I am afraid. Duan Yi said fiercely, "If it is not good, we will immediately seek refuge with the Yen sect. I think we can save our lives." Priest Shi thought for a while and sighed, "Then let us give it a try." Hong Yu obtained the knowledge he needed. After discussing Tao for a few months at Phoenix Cry Gorge, he left the mountain. Now that he had visited most of the large sects that had moved from the 9 continents to the Mountain Sea realm, he should have gone to the Spirit Gate next. However, to fill in the gaps in the knowledge, he still had to go to the Yuhuan heavens, so he could only leave this place as his last stop. After going down the mountain, Hong Yu was silent all the way. Ran Xiushu was a little puzzled and said, "Fellow Taoist, you seem to have something on your mind? Could it be that you encountered some difficulty in comprehending Tao? Can you tell me? I might be able to help you." Hong Yu said in a deep voice, "I was going to mention this to you. Ever since I obtained the knowledge given by sect leader Tao, I can already see the silhouette of that person in my divine decree. But fellow Taoists saw it. That day, I only looked at it for a while, and my Dharma body almost collapsed because of it. In the end, I was able to gather the silhouette of the memory. Can the Great Spirit Tablet of the Origin Mirage Gate really withstand it? If there was a large gap between the two cultivators, then those with low cultivation could not casually look at them. For example, if one did not deliberately reveal himself, then the junior disciples would not be able to see him. Moreover, the higher the realm, the greater the gap. Although the sect leader of the Origin Mirage Gate had cut off his past and future body, and his cultivation was extremely high, this treasure of the sect could not surpass the boundary of the mortal metamorphosis level. Therefore, he was worried that even if he gathered the memory, he would not be able to achieve his original goal. Ran Xiushu pondered for a while and said with a smile, "I see. There's no harm in asking the fellow Taoists of the bright nether heavenly lake. I'm sure I'll be able to find a solution." When he finished speaking, he turned his divine decree and found Wei Zihong. Wei Zihong felt the divine decree and recognized it. Seeing that it was Ran Xiushu looking for him, he accepted it and asked for the reason. He smiled and said, "This is easy. When the time comes, you just need to set up the altar and pray according to the rules." Ran Xiushu listened and thanked him. Then he left the divine decree and told Hong Yu about it. Hong Yu nodded and said, "I see." Since there was a solution, he let go of this matter and came to the eastern wasteland with Ran Xiushu. It was not to visit the 100 nations of the eastern wasteland, but because there was a realm gate leading to the Yuhuan heavens. Now, to the Yuhuan heavens, other than the realm gate set up by the Almighty, there was only the realm gate of Teaching Yen. However, to pass through the realm ring, one's cultivation had to reach a certain realm. They also needed to request from the big sects and state their intentions. There were no conditions to pass through the realm gate. As long as one was not a demon or evil, even a junior disciple could pass through. With their identity, it was easy to pass through the realm ring. However, Ran Xiushu suggested to try the realm gate of Teaching Yen, and Hong Yu had no objections. When they arrived at the south of the eastern wasteland, they saw a light screen that connected to the sky. It extended along the ridge of a mountain range, spanning over 100 miles. There were cultivators, spiritual boats, and flying beasts passing through it at all times. Hong Yu said, "It's quite spectacular. Fellow Taoist Ran, what is the origin of this Teaching Yen?" As a mortal metamorphosis cultivator, he had seen grander sceneries than this, but this was the first time he had seen a realm-crossing gate of such a scale. It must have required a heaven-toppling amount of magic power to support such a thing. Ran Xiushu said, "This sect has not been rising for a long time. It seems that Taoist magic was cut off. Just now it has risen. As for who passed down this Taoist magic, we still don't know. However, to be able to open such a realm gate, it is very likely that it was Yuan Zun of the human Tao." When one reached the True Yang realm, there was a huge gap between them and the cultivators below. Not to mention the legendary creator Yuan Zun, even Bo Bai and Bo Xian, who protected the mountain and sea realm, were not seen by the cultivators below. Even if a cultivator had severed his past and future body, in the eyes of the true Yang Almighty, there was not much difference between them and ordinary Taoist cultivators. Therefore, if this Almighty did not take the initiative to say it, they would not know. Hong Yu was always concerned about the cultivation methods and Taoist magic. When he heard that it might have been passed down by an Almighty, he could not help but ask, "I wonder what the teachings of this sect are like?" Ran Xiushu said, "This sect's cultivation method is quite unique. It is completely different from the other sections. One can cultivate Taoist magic without the need of external objects such as spiritium. Hong Yu pondered for a moment and said, "If that's the case, this method is worthy of the word marvelous. However, this kind of method must be more difficult the higher one goes." The essence and breadth of cultivation methods had always been a contradiction. The higher one could cultivate a cultivation method, the harder it was to cultivate it. The easier it was to spread a cultivation method, the harder it was to climb up. According to his judgment, the Taoist magic of the teaching yen was easy to learn but difficult to master. In terms of the upper-level cultivators, it should not be able to compete with the big sections. However, after thinking about it, he realized that it was not right. He had neglected one thing. The absence of spiritium meant that as long as there were human beings in the world, they could cultivate this level of Taoist magic. It was hard to say how many realms there were in the heavens now. However, even if there was only one talented person in a realm, when many realms gathered together, it would be a huge force. The most important thing was that the teaching yen also had the realm gate. This meant that all the almighty who were scattered in various realms could gather in one place. This was very terrifying. However, he did not say much. He thought that since he could see all these, the big sects in the heavens and realms should also be able to see it. Since they did not have any reaction, there was no need for him to go and meddle. The two of them watched for a moment and then crossed the realm gate. In a trance, they found themselves on an unfamiliar altar. After a brief calculation, they knew that they had arrived in the Yuhuan heavens. Chapter 2261. Inside the Ji-yang subaltar, a young cultivator stood under a large tree, playing with a white-furred jade monkey that was squatting on a tall branch. From time to time, he would even throw 2 fruits at it. However, the monkey did not give him any face. After eating the flesh of the fruit that he threw at him, it threw the skin back at him and even bared its teeth at him. The young cultivator sighed and put his hands beside his ears. In the next moment, he suddenly pulled his head up and even stuck out his tongue on purpose. He slanted his eyes and made a funny face. When the monkey saw this, its body stiffened. Then, it let out a loud howl and ran away on all 4s. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared, leaving only the tree crown shaking. The young cultivator laughed out loud. However, it looked very strange with his head hanging in the air. At this moment, a servant walked in from outside. Seeing this scene, he only rolled his eyes and bowed. He said, "Attendant Go." Han quickly hid the expression on his face. He pressed his head against his neck and straightened it. When he turned his head back, he had already become serious. He said, "What is it?" The servant's mouth twitched. Fortunately, he had seen this many times. He said, "There's a letter. It says that Attendant Go is an old acquaintance. It says that Attendant Go has to open it personally." Han asked curiously, "My old acquaintance?" He thought for a while and took the letter. Seeing that it was from Duan Yi and Taoist Shi, he suddenly understood. So it's these 2 teachers. First, they tried to establish a friendship. Then, they said that the 2 of them were being hunted down by many sections. Now, they were in hiding. Therefore, they wrote a letter to ask if they could find a suitable way to preserve their cultivation without severing their memories. Finally, the 2 of them said that if it was really impossible, they could ask Meng Hu to lend a hand. In return, they were willing to submit to him and be at his beck and call. After Han finished reading, he kept the letter and went to see altar leader Yang of the Ji-yang subaltar. He said that he wanted to meet his teacher. Altar leader Yang was curious and asked for the reason. Han did not hide anything and told him the situation. Altar leader Yang pondered for a moment and felt that this matter was too complicated. It was best for him not to get involved. Although he did not know Han's exact identity, he knew that this person was extremely important. Otherwise, the church would not have asked him to keep an eye on this person. As long as the church did not explicitly order him to do so, he would definitely not let him escape. Moreover, he had his own thoughts as well. Han was so talented that he would definitely be able to take up the position of a protector in the future. If he were to go somewhere else, it would not be his turn. Thus, he found an excuse and said, "I can't make the decision on this matter. I need to report it to the headquarters. Deacon Go, please wait patiently for the news. Gohan had been in the division for so long, how could he not see that Branch Master Yang was purposely evading the responsibility? By the time he reported the matter to the main altar and the letter came back, Duan and Shi would have been surrounded and killed by the various sections. However, he also knew that it was useless for him to say anything. Moreover, he did not have any hopes for this place. He was merely informing the branch altar of this matter in disguise. Therefore, he did not continue to pester them. He bade them farewell and returned to his lodgings. He immediately wrote a letter and entrusted a reliable attendant to head to the Kuanshur continent to pass the letter to his teacher, Meng Hu. Inside the Kuanshur continent's division altar, Meng Hu was dozing off with a civet cat in his arms. Now that he was the great protector, he already had his own private garden. This place occupied a vast area and the scenery was pleasant. It was as warm as spring. All kinds of exotic flowers and fruits of the Kuanshur continent were planted here, specially for the great protector to enjoy. After a cultivator had severed their mortal body, many people would keep a respectful distance from mortal objects. However, the transcendence of cultivation lay in following one's heart. If one wished to see something, one could see it, and if one wished to obtain it, one could obtain it. Even though some cultivators only liked to look up and admire the scenery of the mortal world occasionally and would not stay for too long, Meng Hu did not mind. He felt that this was quite good. There were too many interesting things in the world that he had yet to experience, so why should he be in a hurry to give up? Recently, with his actions, the protectors in the spell altar already knew how to deal with those heaven-made spell carvings. Even in the realm where the spirit of creation had spread, as long as it was not too serious, there was no need for him to take action personally. He could leave it to his disciple, Zhuyu, and he only needed to oversee the branch altar. At this moment he sensed something. He stretched out his hand and summoned a ray of light. It turned into a talisman book in his hand. With a turn of his divine will, he read the contents. He grunted as he recalled the two of them. He touched his chin and felt that it was not bad to have two people under his command. However, he remembered Zhang Chan's instructions. Before doing anything, he had to discuss it with the altar master first. This was because even if something happened, the two of them would be responsible for it together. At the same time, Gaoguo also received the report. According to the rules of the main altar, he had to ask about any correspondence that involved the spirits of creation, no matter how much he trusted them. Meng Hu's correspondence had to be checked unless it was to communicate with Zhang Chan. However, in order to avoid unnecessary conflicts, Meng Hu naturally knew about this matter. However, he did not care about it. After reading the letter, he fell into deep thought. He knew that there was indeed a portion of cultivators who cultivated the spirits of creation that were led astray by Meng Hu. Of course, it could also be said that they were enlightened. Overall, these people did not pose much of a threat. From the edict, it could be seen that as long as they did not blindly follow the Tao, they could be communicated with. Moreover, they could be used by the Yen sect. There was no need to kill them all. Moreover, with the current situation, if they could be used to deal with those that needed to be dealt with. However, he did not do anything because he knew that the main altar should have already known about this matter. Presumably, there would be an official edict coming soon. As expected, the main altar reacted very quickly. Not long after, a talisman book was sent over, telling him not to worry about it for the time being and to observe the development of the matter. If there was anything wrong, he could just take action to quell it. Altar Master He Shenren was currently reading through the memorials submitted by the various altars. At this moment, his expression was relaxed, not as solemn as when he took office just now. Currently, under his arrangements, the operations of the branch altars could be said to be orderly. Although under the wily invasion of the spirits of creation, problems kept popping up, but the branch altars did not fall into disarray. They were all resolved one by one. Moreover, after he ordered the closure of the realm gate, because many small sects were cut off from the Kuanshur continent, the relationship with the large sects had actually eased up. He believed that if someone else were to sit in his position, they would not be able to do better than him. At this moment, there was a sound outside the residence. He put down his brush and asked, "What's the matter?" A voice answered from outside, "Altar Master, the Great Guardian is here to visit." Shenren was a little surprised, but then he said seriously, "Quickly invite him in." He stood up and personally went to the door to welcome him. After a while, he saw Meng Hu walking over. He smiled. After greeting him, he was about to invite Meng Hu in for a chat, but unexpectedly, the latter directly said, "Altar Master I've come to look for you." Shenren did not mind. In his eyes, Meng Hu was a straightforward and honest person. He did not have any false etiquette, so he said, "Guardian Meng, please speak your mind. As long as it does not violate the rules of the altar, I will allow it." He had already been in the altar for half a year, and he was extremely satisfied with Meng Hu. As the Great Guardian, he originally had the authority to give advice and command over the other guardians. This was also a method used by the headquarters to keep the altar master in check. However, Meng Hu never cared about these things. It seemed that he had given up on this part of the authority. Therefore, after a few probing attempts, he successfully took over this part of the authority. This allowed him to quickly establish his authority and smoothly implement the edict to every corner of the branch altars. However, he also knew that he had to compensate Meng Hu. Therefore, if Meng Hu had any request now, as long as it was not too excessive, he would not refuse. Meng Hu immediately told him the purpose of his visit. When Shenren heard that this matter involved the other altars, and also the spirit of good fortune, he felt that it was a bit tricky, but still decided to agree. The main thing was that Meng Hu gave him the impression that he was too calm. He assumed that he knew what to do, and that nothing would go wrong. He smiled and said, "Guardian Meng, just go back and wait patiently. Leave this matter to me." After Hong Yu arrived in the universal heavens, he had been here for several years. Relying on his status as an upper realm cultivator of the mountain and sea realm, it was easy for him to obtain the knowledge he wanted. However, he originally had great expectations for the universal heavens, but when he actually came into contact with them, he was strangely disappointed. With the exception of a few sects, the cultivators of the universal heavens were no match for the cultivators of the 9 continents at the same realm. However, the art of perception crossing made him pay more attention, and he discovered that it was a path of no return. Once you embarked on this path, you could only continue down it. One day, you would no longer be able to support your own magic power and die. In the end, you might not even be able to protect your own spirit, and lose all hope of reincarnation. Although it seemed unwise to do so, in reality, with the exception of a few people, most mortal metamorphosis cultivators were powerless to fight back against perception-crossing cultivators, even if you severed your past and future bodies. If you wanted to fight against them, you also needed to be a perception-crossing cultivator. If you didn't reach this realm, you could be easily destroyed. Under such circumstances, there were some choices that you had no choice but to make. Now, because of the existence of karma points in the universal heavens, and the mediation of the Green Jade Palace, no one would do such a thing. As a result, the number of perception-crossing cultivators would continue to decrease. On the other hand, he'd heard a piece of news here. It was said that Origin Jade was suspected to be coming into the world from a certain place, and many cultivators were rushing there. Even though he didn't know if this was true or not, most cultivators would rather believe it than miss such a small chance. He made a mental note of it. He planned to go there after he finished what he had to do. Therefore, he and Ran Xiushu's clone passed through the realm gate and returned to the mountain and sea realm. They didn't stop, but used the Dharma altar to travel. In half a day, they arrived in front of the abyss. The abyss was no longer as desolate as it had been when the cultivators of the 9 continents just now occupied it. The various sects of the Spirit Gate had built large temples here to welcome their fellow Taoists. Just now, the 2 of them arrived. An elder of the Spirit Gate came to greet them and said, "Are you Superior Hong Yu and Superior Ran? The sect leaders of the Spirit Gate have been waiting for you for a long time. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories." Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.